Chapter 1377. Back in the heart of Karazhan, Duque sat on the throne of elements. How are the users of the weave responding? Duque could easily monitor the situation of the weave, but he could not communicate directly with the users like Khadgar could. Khadgar deliberated for a second or two. Most of them praised this as an epic-making feat. It's simple, fast, and safe. The only problem is that they want to increase the upper limit of mana usage and lower the requirements for using magic. Reject them. We are not the Church of Holy Light that saves everyone. Greedy people who do not follow the rules of equivalent exchange will be punished, from cutting off the weave to killing them. Duque made the decision on the spot. Understood. Emperor Wickler nodded. Cursing people was not something he liked. Killing people was what he liked. The swarm of insects did not have complicated thoughts. Those that did not listen were always killed. Since they had recognized Duque as their master, they could only obey. After dealing with a few urgent problems, Duque began to rearrange the distribution of the weave. In Duque's mind, the weave was not only the internet of the magic world, but also a warning net. It was a permanent shield that could provide support to his mages at any time, allowing them to cast powerful spells. In the early stages of the weave, it was easy to set up controlled mana channels in the main cities. However, once the weave was formed, it could not be so simple to inject elements. The spiritual force that mages contributed to the weave could not be casually recycled either. All power had to be guided and filtered in a standardized manner. This was like a water plant. After taking a large amount of water from a clean source, it could not be sent to thousands of households. First, it needed to be filtered. From the simplest sedimentation tank, to a high-density filter, and then to a chemical disinfection process. Then, it needed to be tested from microbes and bacteria to chemical substances. Finally, the finished water could be released and flowed into the hands of the users. What Duque wanted to do was very similar to a water plant. In the past, mages simply and crudely drew elements from the elemental realm into their bodies, combining them with the mana in their magic circuits, and then releasing them to form magic. This was a serious problem of insufficient filtration. In order to attract all the mages to use the weave, it first had to be pure. At the same time, he used the recovered mental strength to unify the mental strength and imprint the will of the entire Demon King. This would effectively prevent the weave from being abused by outsiders or having its control stolen. Lastly, why were magic incantations so long? It was not because it required so many incantations to use the elements, but because it required so many incantations to make the elements stable and controllable. Since ancient times, magic researchers had racked their brains in order to make magic compound reactions and prevent the magic elements from destroying a mage's body as much as possible. In order to surpass these pioneers in magic, the weave needed to be able to construct a magic model in the shortest time possible after a mage made a request to cast a spell, and then deliver it to the mage safely and quickly. After achieving these 3 points, the final key was to have a wide coverage area. This was just like a cell phone. No matter how beautiful a cell phone was, it would be useless if there was no signal. How to expand the weave in every corner of Azeroth was Duque's future task. It was foreseeable that this would be a very long process. Fortunately, I still have time. After Duque expressed his thoughts and design intentions, the rest was left to the elemental emissaries to discuss and implement. Returning to his bedroom, Duque found that Jaina was already there. It's rare that you're here so early. I thought you'd be busy for a while. Duque was not joking. There were so many kings in the alliance, but Jaina was definitely the busiest one. When the Horde suffered a disaster, most of the alliance's aid was first transported to Theramore, and then transferred to small boats or offshore flatboats. Later, once the orcs migrated from the Outer Realm, the orcs from the Dark Portal would also be sent to Theramore through the portal in the Watchtower. Basically, there were as many things that needed Jaina's personal approval as there were stars in the sky. Jaina combed her brilliant blonde hair and revealed a charming smile. Please, the person who called me here is my most respected teacher, the man I love the most. Even if you were bored and suddenly wanted to discuss the flow of magic under the M-shaped posture, I had to come. Duque facepalmed. Am I such a person who can't distinguish between public and private matters? Jaina smiled without saying anything. It was clear that she was saying, you are. Alright, there's a change of plans. I'm not going to the Outer Realm. I was going to go, but Elune persuaded me not to. While the soul of Azeroth is asleep, She doesn't want me to leave Azeroth. I was going to persuade you even if Elune didn't say so. Since you've already made your decision, that's even better. What's your new plan now? I'm going to expand the magic net with all my might. I don't think I'll be able to leave. Help me open the dark portal. Okay. July 5th, 22nd year of the dark portal. The Alliance and the Horde decided to send out an allied army again. This time the Horde sent out 40,000 troops, led by Thrall himself. They joined the Alliance's 50,000 troops and gathered at the dark portal. The huge portal in front of them exuded an ominous aura. The dry, crimson land was filled with an excessively clean air. There was no life, no aura, not even a smell. Thrall, who was born in a human kingdom, had thought that the terrible barren lands or the dry Silithus desert were the worst places. He didn't expect this cursed land to bring him an even greater shock. Is this the door of darkness in the cursed lands? Thrall murmured. Yes. Our people are on the other side of the portal, Orgrim said softly. It's time. Not far away, Varian was riding a red four-legged insect. It looked black with sharp insect horns and long, sharp legs that didn't match Varian's silver-white armor. However, since both the Alliance and the Horde were the same, there was no need to laugh at each other. Thrall nodded at Varian. William pulled out one of his artifact swords and raised it up high. The sunlight reflected off the blade, giving off a dazzling radiance. Not far away, Jaina, who was standing on a magic formation on a high platform, started chanting an incantation. It was a restriction placed on the dark portal, preventing it from obtaining power from anywhere around it. Inside the huge door, there was an illusory mix of black and green waves like tumbling mud. In the next moment, before the portal was completely formed, countless demons pounced out of the dark portal. Chapter 1378. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Accompanied by the piercing sound of the wind, black cannonballs flew across the sky not far from the Allied army. They were like a flock of migrating birds, covering the sky and the sun. However, they flew lower and lower. They were so densely packed according to the predetermined shooting pattern, like a black blanket covering the top of the demon army. The floating fortress Naxxramas, plus the watchtower artillery position that stretched for several kilometers, thousands of giant cannons fired at the same time, forming a barrage that turned the entire sky into a black tide, slapping fiercely into the turbulence formed by the demons. The process of the shell explosion seemed to be very slow. Even 2 or 3 kilometers away, it could be clearly seen that the huge demons were blown apart, and then the broken limbs and wreckage exploded into the sky. The slowness was just an optical illusion. With the crimson ground as the background, waves of shells screeched through the void, and some stray shells even brushed over the coalition army formation, exploding into the open space in front of the formation, sending dirt and gravel soaring into the sky. This was not the first time he had seen the Alliance's artillery formation. Every time he saw it, he still felt his blood surge and couldn't control himself. Cao was suddenly glad that the tribal warriors didn't have to brave such terrible artillery fire to attack the Alliance's position. Long-range artillery cleansing. Sniper arrows shooting. Magic saturation attack. Spear volley piercing. Without passing through these 4 lines of death, it was impossible to touch the Alliance's position. However, now the unlucky ones were the demons of the Burning Legion. There were a few blind elite demons who tried to rush over with the shells, but they didn't end up any better than the previous ordinary demons. The Alliance had larger caliber artillery, and as long as they weren't immune to fire damage or had a wide area, protective shell, magic shield, they would die. Sure enough, in less than half a minute, those guys were blown to pieces by small steel cannon-level mortars. Cao was a little worried that such a fierce artillery attack would destroy the dark portal together. However, he saw a scene that surprised him. Under the fierce artillery attack, the dark portal did flicker in the fire, as if it would collapse at any time, but this didn't happen. An unexplainable magical power repelled the cannonballs flying in all directions. In the center of the field of vision, it stood there. In his perception, it didn't exist. The dark portal was a special existence that seemed to be located in the center of the cursed lands, but it was actually located in a different spatial dimension. The violent bombardment continued. The demons collided with the cannonballs and broken limbs and flesh rained down like a downpour. In the end, even the tribal army was a little numb. The orc warriors yawned and the Tauren warriors scratched their buttocks. It was as if the Alliance's cannons were not powerful demons that could slaughter an entire village, but a group of moving targets. The bombardment lasted for about 10 minutes, and then Jaina's voice came through the magic transmission. There aren't many demons left. The artillery fire ceased within a minute. Thousands of cannons fired continuously. The scene was quite shocking, but it was a pity that the cost was astronomical. If it wasn't for the recent introduction of a new currency nicknamed Azeroth RMB with gold as collateral, which was very popular and unanimously recognized by the Alliance tribes, to a certain extent filling the empty national treasuries through the issuance of additional currency, the Alliance quartermaster and internal affairs officer would probably have to jump into the river. Woo woo woo, the orc trumpeter blew a huge horn, and the desolate and heroic sound of the horn echoed in the cursed lands. That was the sound of the horn to attack. Attack. Sao raised the hammer of destruction high, squeezed his legs on the white-furred wolf under him and led the charge forward. It had to be said that on a battlefield full of huge pits that were more than a meter deep, the wolf mount was better than the Alliance's war horses. The large pit that the steam tank would lie in could be crossed by the wolf with a light leap, and as a native breed of Draenor, there was no problem of acclimatization. As long as there was enough meat, the wolf was one of the most ideal mounts in the Outer Lands. Fortunately, the Alliance didn't have to rely on the Envy tribe this time. Seeing that the tribal army quickly drowned out the scattered demons in front of the Door of Darkness, and then entered the Door of Darkness in an orderly manner, William clamped the slightly hard abdomen of the insect, and the insect that looked like a small car with a black base and red rings immediately strode forward with its 4 long sickle-like legs. As soon as he passed through the Door of Darkness, he suddenly felt a sense of weightlessness, as if he was falling from a high altitude. However, it was only for a moment, and he and the insect quickly turned into a stream of light, crossing the void that was measured in units of light years. When he came back to his senses, he was already on the back of the insect on a long and wide illusory passage, charging towards the space outside the Door of Darkness. Outside the door, there was a pitch-black sky with a fiery red base. In front of the Alliance soldiers, reflected in their vision, 2 armies were engaged in a life-and-death battle on the similarly red land in front of them. All the sounds of battle seemed to be isolated by an invisible wall of air. The moment William led the vanguard knights of the Griffin Legion out of the Door of Darkness, the earth-shattering sound waves were like crashing waves crashing against the shore. It violently impacted everyone's eardrums. What William saw was a huge Lord of the Abyss, a stone giant that was covered in green flames, and a large number of evil demon guards and doomsday guards. The only fortunate thing was that the number of these evil demons wasn't so high that it would make people feel hopeless. Sensing the arrival of the Alliance, Thrall consciously moved the battle line towards the north of the Door of Darkness. Alliance attack. William took the lead and attacked towards the south. The Alliance army surged out of the Door of Darkness like a tide. First it was the cavalry riding on the insects, followed by the Courage flying insect army led by Shachla, followed by the mages, and finally the heavy and clumsy artillery regiment. In the Alliance army no one noticed an ordinary mage. A male human mage who looked less than 20 years old almost fell off his horse. An Alliance knight beside him reacted quickly and pulled him up. The 2 of them quickly left the main road and dismounted to rest. There was a group of people who had just finished teleporting but were not feeling well. Be careful, mage. If you fall off your horse during the charge, you'll most likely die. Thank you. The young mage straightened his mage crown and saw the emblem on the other party's armor. Storm Guardian? Yes. My ancestors were Highland Knights of Torrential Castle. I'm Thomas. What about you? The young mage also showed the emblem on his mage robe. Mage Mark Dooku from Theramore sends his regards. Chapter 1379. Krozen Magic Training Room. After injecting highly concentrated liquid mana into the magic circuit in Jaina's body and training her to the point where she was barely breathing, Duque ended the night's lesson with satisfaction. Wiping away Jaina's sweat, Duque showed her a new spell. This is. Jaina, who was tired and sleepy, suddenly opened her eyes wide. She saw a person in the huge 108-inch curved magic mirror projection. Even if it was just a back view, Jaina would never mistake it for Duke's back view. Gianna was certain that this was a real-time image, because she could see the Varian trio attacking from the far end of the image. Jaina knew that the allied forces of the Alliance and the Horde were fighting against the Burning Legion at the gate of the Dark Portal in the Outland. Jaina directly contacted the mages in the Outland through a magic message and opened another real-time image. She was immediately shocked to find that there was no delay between the two images. That meant that there was indeed another Duque at the Dark Portal. Jaina turned her head in shock and looked at Duque, who was smirking. "Who's that guy?" "That's a character that I made with my own hands." Jaina was completely dumbfounded. There was only one sentence in her mind. "Is that even possible?" Duque shrugged. "I can't help it. I can't leave Azeroth. Even if I send a clone with my soul, it might be captured by the place and have its information stolen, leading to terrible consequences. So, I made a clone that looked exactly like me and sent it over." With that, Duque sat on a comfortable chair and gestured for Jaina to sit over. When Jaina intimately sat between Duque's legs and leaned against Duque's chest, Duque handed her a magic crystal ball. Jaina took it and immersed her mind in the crystal ball. She immediately understood what the Duque near the Dark Portal was. It was a magic construct wrapped in flesh and skin. In essence, this Duque was no different from Kuel Salas's magic puppet in Silvery Moon City. The only key was that this magic construct was directly controlled by Duque 24/7. The amazing thing was that Duque had equipped this clone with a complete stomach and even a complete blood circulation system. It seemed like it needed to eat, drink, and defecate. It seemed like this clone could still be injured or even die. In reality, what was important was the magic core that replaced the heart, liver, and spleen. This clone not only provided the circulation of Morning Star magic, but it could also instantly raise the clone's strength to the Radiant Moon rank through magic transmission. This clone also had a soul, but it was the soul of a wizard Kurtiras who had died in battle. Duque had put it inside. All the feelings of the doppelganger would be directly fed back to Duque in Karazhan, and all the movements would be done by Duque himself. Jaina was shocked. Can this level of remote control really be done? Duque pursed his lips. As long as the transmission of magic between Azeroth and the Outer Realm is not cut off. There is indeed a problem with the situation over there. Fortunately, my design looks perfect for now. Duque explained it to Jaina in detail. The core of all remote control was the network. Only when the network was stable and powerful enough could the control delay be lowered to an acceptable level. Duque first asked Solarian to place a weave core near the Dark Portal in the Outer Realm. Could be seen as a magical version of a cell phone signal base station. With this as the core, the weave was laid out. Since Draenor had already exploded, the Outer Realm was no longer a planet, but a half of the planet's crust that had lost its core and was suspended in the void. Although there was still gravity and air on the surface of the planet because of its large mass, not only had the planet lost its master, but even the ordinary laws had begun to collapse. Thus, from time to time, islands could be seen floating in midair in the distance, or lightning energy scattered in all directions. Duque had easily let the weave invade Draenor, which also gave him a wake-up call. If he could do it so easily, the Burning Legion could also set a terrible trap for him by changing the laws of Draenor's world. Of course, now that Duque had gone to a clone without self-awareness, no matter how he tricked it, he would not be able to trick Duque himself. At this moment, Jaina was very curious about this new remote control system. Intelligence was a very key quality for a mage to grow. What are those two numbers that keep jumping up and down? FPS. Ping. Jaina pointed to the upper right corner of the projection screen. When Duque saw this, he secretly stuck out his tongue, sweating in his heart. He could only explain slowly. FPS refers to the number of times the mirror image refreshes per second. For now, the maximum is 60. The higher the value, the better. The higher it is, the smoother it will be, and if it's low, the image will feel sluggish. Ping is the delay of what happens in Draenor being transmitted to us. The lower the delay, the better. If the delay is low, you'll get a response almost immediately when you give an order. If the delay is high, it'll be 200,300. You'll find that when you give an order, it'll take 1 or 2 seconds before there's a response. By then the character will be finished. Oh yes, the lowest delay is 0. Oh, I see. I really admire you. Where did you get so many wonderful ideas? Did you get them from the Titan's relics? No, I'm a transmigrator. If I wasn't careful, I'd accidentally brought things out of the game through the system genie. On the surface, Duque had a better idea. It has nothing to do with the Titans, okay? Who told your master to be the #1 magic genius in Azeroth? Very arrogant and asking for a beating. But inspiration was the most mysterious thing. Success was 1% inspiration and 99% sweat. This was true, but there was another sentence behind it. There were many people who were willing to pay 99% of the sweat, but very few people had that 1% inspiration. In the face of Duque's arrogance, Jaina could only twist her slender waist seductively and roll her eyes at Duque. Jaina was very smart. She quickly discovered that Duque's clone could be controlled through extremely simple operations. With just a thought, Duque's clone could move forward, backward, left, and right. It was even easier to release magic. For example, by pressing shortcut key 1, the little person in the image could chant spells and start to release frost arrows. You can use your mind to directly control the whole process. Why do you use these? Duque put his arm around Jaina's waist. I get tired of it sometimes. Maybe I'll ask the elemental emissary to help watch my character. Jaina was dumbfounded. There was actually such a suffocating operation. Chapter 1380. It wasn't through divine power, but pure magic to control a character that could be considered his clone. Who knew how many galaxies away, but controlling the entire situation, other than Duque, there was no one else who could play such a difficult game. Gianna was convinced of Duque's abilities. When are you going to get me a clone like this to play with? Please forgive me for refusing, Duque said firmly. Why? What if you lose and your character is desecrated? Even though I know it's not you, I'll still be upset. What green forgiveness? That was the most annoying. Jaina rolled her eyes and didn't insist. In her eyes, not every mage was called Duke Marcus, and not every mage had the shocking talent of casting multiple spells. Let's not talk about Karazhan for now. In the dark portal, Duque's clone, who had changed his name to Mark Dooku, clearly transmitted all his senses to the main body. Boom. A huge green stone fell from the sky. It directly smashed a steam tank and the broken metal parts flew everywhere, causing a second wave of damage to the surrounding Alliance soldiers. The crowd simply fell to the ground one after another. Damn. Hellfire. The knight called Thomas raised his shield and very considerately protected himself and the mage who called himself Mark. Tilwall. Are you also a professional? Duque asked. Let me emphasize, in the standard sense, a knight was a noble title between a noble and a commoner. Cavalry was a soldier while holy knights were professionals. Yes, a mid-level warrior. Right, can you deal with that thing? Thomas pointed his sword at the hellfire monster that quickly turned from a large stone into a green giant bathed in fire. Don't joke. Mages would be exhausted if they could win against that. In fact, they didn't even need to do anything. There was an Alliance second lieutenant who shouted, Holy Light Iron Fist. Who has the Holy Light Iron Fist? The full name of the Holy Light Iron Fist was Highly Concentrated Holy Light Shoulder Type Demon Fighting Weapon. Because it looked like a rocket launcher with the word Iron Fist on it, the soldiers called it the Holy Light Iron Fist. This was light equipment that the Alliance had specially developed for ordinary soldiers without holy light and mana to fight against large demons. A rocket filled with highly concentrated Stratholme holy water was inserted into a simple hollow iron tube as thick as an arm. With a small amount of gunpowder sealed at the tail of the rocket to ignite, the anti-demon rocket could be launched 50 meters away. Of course, due to the lack of accuracy, the Holy Light rocket launcher would basically fly away after exceeding 30 meters. But it didn't matter because it was filled with holy water, and the bullets were made of fragile plastic. As long as it wasn't a demon warlock or a vital point that was hit, even if a person was hit, other than a slight dizziness, it was no different from taking a bath. They didn't even have to worry about accidentally injuring someone. The moment the Iron Fist of Holy Light was launched, it received a lot of praise from the middle and lower-ranking soldiers. Without the support of heavy weapons, it was still better than fighting the demons with swords and spears. The Hellfire, which was more than 3 stories tall, discovered these short creatures and shot a few beams of light at them. It did not dodge. As a meat shield in the Burning Legion's charge, the word dodge never existed in its mind. Using the Iron Fist of Holy Light to fight it was as easy as shooting a target during training. Several holy light missiles left a long trail of golden flames behind as they plunged headfirst into the Hellfire's huge body. It was very eye-catching. The ferocious body of the Hellfire suddenly stopped, and then in a short second rays of golden light escaped from its body. Bang! With a loud bang, the whole Hellfire was blown to pieces in front of nearly 100 Alliance soldiers. Haha! Long live the Alliance! Long live Duke Marcus! The thrill of defeating a monster that was larger than one could imagine was indescribable. Thomas, like the other Alliance soldiers, shouted excitedly and whistled. Only then did he realize that the young mage behind him wasn't very surprised. You've seen the Hellfire with your own eyes? Mark Dooku, who was being controlled by Duque, smiled. I saw it on Mount Hyjal. Oh, that's amazing. Brothers, protect this young mage, Lord Dooku. He experienced the Battle of Mount Hyjal. Wow, amazing. The soldiers beside him chimed in. A situation that even Duque didn't expect happened. The soldiers around him spontaneously formed a circle with him as the center. Seeing Duque's dumbfounded look, Thomas smiled. Don't be surprised. This is just the experience of everyone in the war. We're not the lucky Stormwind or Lordaeron, and we're not dwarves or elves either. The scattered soldiers of the other small countries are used to grouping around the strong. Duque understood immediately. Even today the Alliance still claimed to be the 11 kingdoms, but only he himself knew how much of an exaggeration it was. Originally, among the 7 human kingdoms, Gilneas had left the Alliance after World War II and had been closed off. There were only 6 left. Even though all of the 7 kingdoms had had their capital destroyed, Stormwind, which was the first to be destroyed, recovered the best. Today, because of Duque's existence, the 6 human kingdoms in the Alliance had long been divided into different levels. Stormwind was the strongest, Lordaeron and Dalajan were second, Kurtiras and Alterac were a level lower, and the weakest was naturally Stormguard, which hadn't even recovered its kingdom title. The people of Stormguard were also tired. After Duke Marcus, who was born as a commoner, became the uncrowned king of the Alliance, the nobility had faded a lot. However, ideas that had settled down for 2,800 years were not so easy to change. When Torrential Fortress was destroyed, their disappointing king, Garen Trollbane, died at the hands of the Scourge army, and was humiliated into becoming a servant of the Lich King. Thinking about how awesome Garen's father, King Salas, was, beating up the trolls was as easy as drinking water. Compared to this brainless and cowardly person, the brave Highlanders felt extremely aggrieved. Restoring a kingdom was not an easy task. Even if the Alliance's commander, Duque, had already said that he would support the people of Stormguard to restore their kingdom, they still needed a king. Unlike the Bear family in Alterac, the few old Highland nobles were basically the same in terms of reputation and power. It could be said that none of them were willing to submit to the others. At this time, the higher-ups of the Alliance revealed that the Highland hero of the Second Battle of the Dark Portal, Daneth Trollbane, was not only the nephew of the late King Salas, but also bravely led the vanguard to attack Draenor for the Alliance. The people of Stormguard were instantly excited. Chapter 1381. Starting out as a commoner, he was just a small militia captain at first, and became famous in the Battle of Sodder Bridge and the counterattack on the wetlands. Later, unwilling to be lonely, he gave up fighting for power in his own country, and guarded the Dark Portal for the humans for more than 10 years. In the end, he killed his way into Draenor. No matter how one looked at it, Daoist Trollbane was the true hero who inherited the title of Trollbane, Trollbane Killer. Even when he re-established contact with the Outland, Daoist personally refused to be crowned king, and announced that he was only willing to fight for humans and the Alliance. That's right, the most important reason Daoist refused to be crowned king was that he had no reason to abandon the Outland Expeditionary Force, become a coward and deserter, and return to live a comfortable life as a king. This reason instead aroused the enthusiasm of the people. Thus, the so-called Highland Kings Party who shouted for Daoist to be a hero appeared. They were storm guardians who wandered all over Azeroth. In this Outland expedition they gathered together, joined the expeditionary force and shouted slogans. Fight for the true king of Stormguard. Wipe out the Outland. Let our king return to Torrential Fortress as the victor. The ideal was beautiful, but the reality was harsh. Even if the Storm Guardians had a high proportion of professionals, the absolute number was too small. After eliminating those who had obviously not undergone military training, only a little over 1,000 people were approved to join the Outland Expeditionary Force. Moreover, the composition of the professions was obviously unreasonable. There were many melee fighters, few ranged fighters, and a few priests, but not a single mage. This was normal. The Pharaoh was a profession that needed to burn money to support. The Storm Guardians, who lived a miserable life after the fall of their country, did not have the luxury to nurture their own mages. Even if they had the talent, they would sell themselves to the Dalajan and become a member of the Dalajan Mage Guild. Before the contract was completed, they could not return. Coincidentally, when Torrential Fortress was destroyed and the Storm Guardians had nowhere else to go, it was the current Princess Jaina of Cultivation who opened up Theramore and took in a large number of Storm Guardians and Lordaeron who had lost their homes. That was why they felt an almost blind affinity for Mark Dooku, who claimed to be Mage Cultivation. Mark, who was under Duke's control, did not disappoint them. Although he was not particularly strong, his skillful casting and accurate attacks effectively overturned several demon guards that were charging at him. He even used the Quagmire spell, which was rarely practiced by mages, to trap a hellhound with extremely high magic resistance. Everyone gathered a small team of spearmen and directly stabbed the hellhound to death in the Quagmire. Haha. As expected of a powerhouse who experienced the Battle of Mount Hyjal. Thomas laughed heartily. Mark. Forgive me for being presumptuous, but are you alone? If you don't have a team, can you team up with us? Even if it's a temporary one, we can discuss the conditions. If we have a mage in our team, we can get a higher level mission from the Alliance's military office. Because this concerns Stromgarde's score. After the third battle at the Door of Darkness, Duke had popularized the system of grading and rewards according to the grade. Meritorious service will be rewarded and mistakes will be punished. The Alliance is not a monopoly formed by a few large countries. Even if they are weak, people from other countries and independent organizations can still contribute to the cause of fighting against evil. These were Duke's original words. In order not to dampen the enthusiasm of other small countries and independent organizations, the Alliance would allocate an extra portion of the spoils of war from each battle to the organizations and individuals that performed well in the battle. Not only the spoils of war but also the rewards from the Alliance itself. This was what the small countries valued the most. If the organizations or individuals from the various small countries worked together to obtain enough points, the Alliance could even tilt their policies and allocate manpower and resources to help them fulfill their dreams of revival. For example, an organization that had a certain amount of points proposed to revive a certain village in the Earthy Highlands. The Alliance would send someone to conduct an evaluation and give a score after the event. As long as someone was willing to give enough points to support this plan, once the points were met, the Alliance would send a large number of craftsmen to rebuild the village, opening a path for mountains and building a bridge for rivers. The last group to receive special support from the Alliance was the Wildhammer Dwarves of the Eagle Nest Mountain. Because they had enough points, Duke directly used public funds to pay for the entire Lightning Tank Division of the Iron Stove Fort and let them drive their tanks into the hinterlands. They used steam tanks and all kinds of modern machinery to create a new defense line that was more than 3 kilometers wide along the Varroan Lake in the middle of the hinterlands. With this line of defense, the scattered giant demons that had yet to be exterminated would not be able to sneak up on Eagle Nest Mountain. This made the territory controlled by the Wildhammer Dwarves at least twice as large. That's right. This was the welfare policy of the Alliance to support weak countries. While it greatly increased the cohesion of the countries and organizations in the Alliance, it also raised the reputation of the Alliance to another level. This time, Duke also clearly marked the price of Stromgarde's revival, starting from 2 million points. As long as any organization or individual used various means to gather 2 million points and inject it into the Stromgarde project, the Alliance would fund the reconstruction of the broken Thoradin Wall and Solder Bridge, as well as the entire Rapid Storm City. The reconstruction of Rapid Storm City included the outer city walls, residential areas, and a palace that was not inferior to the Stormwind stronghold. If you wanted to raise the standard in this project, you could, but please give more points. From increasing the number of city walls, improving the quality of the city walls, to building train tracks from Rapid Storm City to South Shore, to turning the residential areas into villas, there was a wide variety of free choices. The people of Stromgard were overjoyed. They wanted to bet their whole race on the spot and earn 2 million points first. Unfortunately, dreams were beautiful but reality was difficult. Even though the alliance had a clear price for points such as a demon guard worth 10 points, it was still far from 2 million points. So they had to win over all the allies they could. Faced with Thomas's invitation, Duque smiled. I am a wandering mage and I have also tasted the destruction of my country. Although Cultivation has been rebuilt, I will not forget the days when the people of Stromgard fought alongside me in Theramore. But I agree. Thank you very much. At this moment in Karazhan, Jaina looked at Duque with a little surprise. Oh my dear, what the hell are you trying to do? You painstakingly asked me to give you Cultivations's identity card, just to help Stromgard restore its country? Duque smirked. Rapid Storm City has to be rebuilt no matter what. This concerns the face of the alliance. Haven't several countries been rebuilt before? Yes. The problem is that the queens of these countries have all followed me. Now I have to make it seem like the alliance is not my word. Chapter 1382. In a sense, the alliance was a group of people who were in the same boat. For a long time, as long as their capital had not fallen, they would not have the nerve to go out and say that they were alliance warriors. Yes, the Gilneas kingdom that built the Greymane Wall to block foreign enemies and cut off the alliance was regarded as a coward. The unkillable Stormwind relied on Du Wei's amazing methods to perfectly restore the kingdom and jump to the top of the alliance. Queen Kalia of Lordaeron was promoted by Duque. Everyone knew that she became the queen because of Duque. For the same reason she vowed not to marry. Okay, the same went for Kuel Salis, Alterac and Kurtiras. Without exception, the Marcus family's Chamber of Commerce did their best to support the restoration of these declining kingdoms. They invested a lot of manpower and resources, rebuilt transportation, sold molded building materials at low prices, and even enjoyed interest-free loans if they had no money. The collateral was only a 30-year concession to certain minerals or specialties in these countries. It was because of this comprehensive support, including the economy, people's livelihood and circulation, that these kingdoms could recover quickly. There was even a widely accepted saying, "You want to restore the kingdom? First have a beautiful queen, then send her to Duke Marcus' harem. Then the country can be revived." When the alliance was in a power struggle, this method was the fastest and most effective. It could allow Duque to complete control of the alliance in the fastest and most peaceful way. When Duque completely controlled the alliance, this method seemed to be inappropriate. The reason why the alliance had such a thriving vitality in history, where the capitals of the various countries were constantly in trouble and the world was repeatedly destroyed, was because of the tolerance that was born for the sake of a common goal. If the alliance only had the appearance of an alliance, it would actually be the empire's plaything. One day the alliance would collapse, and that day might even come before the Burning Legion's attack. This required Duque's higher political wisdom to deal with this matter. No matter who he wanted to protect in private, he had to at least be fair on the surface. There were many countries in the alliance that had fallen. Now there was Stromgard that could be saved. There was also the Gnome Kingdom Gnomeregan that had been temporarily affected by radiation. In the near future, when the Draenei entered the alliance, there would be a half-destroyed Shotrath city. In this life there was no such thing as Kale, that's forcing the Draenei to jump over the wall and flee by flying airships. But Shotrath City, which was located on the broken Draenor, was bound to fall sooner or later. At that time, rebuilding the capital would be another huge project. It was unknown if there were still Draenei living in Exodar, the capital of Azeroth. Jaina understood Duque's decision. However, as a strong woman who was good at making use of her feminine advantages, Jaina gently moved her mouth close to Duque's ear. She blew into his ear and rubbed her fingers against Duque's shoulder and collarbone. I understand. However, the core strength of Theramore was the people of Cultivation, plus the refugees from Stormgard and Lordaeron. Now that you're doing this, they're all gone. Then what's the point of my Theramore? That was what Jaina was trying to say. I remember that when I asked you to build Theramore, it was to build an alliance bridgehead in Kalimdor, right? Have you forgotten what a bridgehead is? Jaina's movements suddenly froze. Damn it. Theramore was developing so well that she had almost forgotten about it. Unknowingly, Jaina had already built Theramore as the new capital of Cultivation. There was no other way. In the past 2,000 years, most of the enemies had come from the mainland, such as the trolls. Cultivation Island was isolated in the sea, more like a paradise. Unfortunately, on the eve of the Battle of Mount Hyjal, the Burning Legion swept through Cultivation, killing the late King Dailin, cruelly breaking the dreams of the people of Cultivation. In the beginning, Theramore had obtained so much manpower and material resources. Of course, it had the support of the alliance led by Duque. Another reason was that the life on the mainland had attracted a group of refugees who had lost their homes and longed for peace. Later, the alliance supported the Horde and obtained a large amount of ore from the Horde. As the only window-type port for trade between the alliance and the Horde, Theramore was simply plucking feathers from the geese. In order to reduce the shipping pressure, the alliance funded the establishment of a large-scale mineral refinery in Theramore, refining the ore into various metal ingots, and then shipping them back to Iron Furnace Castle, Stormwind City, Lordaeron City and other places. On the other hand, in order to support the Battle of Silithus, several munitions factories specialized in manufacturing ammunition were built in Theramore in advance. Because of the trade between the alliance and the Horde as well as military needs, Theramore showed an exaggerated prosperity. Not to mention the people below, even Jaina, the master of Theramore, was numb. No one had thought that if one day the alliance and the Horde fell out, what would happen to Theramore? Without Duque's reminder, Jaina would still not wake up. What about the bridgehead? She had to be prepared to be beaten up. Jaina's golden eyebrows almost stood up, and her beautiful face suddenly became fierce. The Horde has the ability to take down Theramore first, and besides, who dares? Theramore, as a city on an isolated island by the Dustwallow Swamp, had been built with the standards of the strongest military fortress from the beginning. The east was by the sea and the north, west and south were all swamps. The situation in the swamp was terrible. Most of the areas were swamps that could easily swallow people, and there were large numbers of large poisonous spiders, crocodiles and other wild beasts. This was definitely not a good place to march. By the way, to the south of the Dustwallow Swamp was the nest of Duque's Mount Onyxia, and there were thousands of Draconians wandering there. To enter Theramore City, they had to cross an extremely wide waterway. This waterway was a natural moat. With the cannons of the stronghold and a few flying warships, anyone who came would really die. It was definitely not wrong to say that it was easy to defend and hard to attack. Jaina was not bragging, but with the current strength of the Horde, even if they used the entire Horde's regular combat power, they would not be able to defeat Theramore. If they maintained their advantage on the sea and were not blocked, not to mention a year and a half, they could easily defend for 10 years. Duque smiled. Of course you're in an invincible position with conventional tactics. You're just afraid that the other side will use a super magic bomb or something. According to history, Theramore was destroyed by a nuclear-level magic bomb, focusing Rainbow, and Ronan was killed as well. Jaina, who had spent almost all of her youth on Theramore, turned white overnight because of this. Chapter 1383. Since Jaina was his harem, Duque certainly could not watch Theramore be destroyed and Jaina fall into a state of madness or decadence. Jaina wanted to refute, but she immediately shut up. Just like 10 years ago, no one could imagine that there would be warships and fortresses flying in the sky. No one could guarantee that in 10 years, there would not be a terrifying magic bomb that even a demigod could not defend against. Times were changing and so was the situation. Theramore's prosperity benefited from the good relationship between the Horde and the Alliance. But what about the future? Jaina and Duque were immortals, but the chief of the Horde was not. Thrall was a wise leader, but what about his successor? Jaina would never forget the suffering she had when she was a young girl. For a moment she almost thought that she was going to die in the icy Tirisful woodland at the hands of the cruel orcs. Every time he woke up in the middle of the night he would think of those cruel and bloodthirsty green faces. Yes, that was the nature of the orcs. Unknowingly she gritted her teeth until they creaked. Understood, I will move the civilian industries back to Cultivation. After all, the inscription on my crown is Queen Cultivation, not Queen Theramore. After venting her anger, Jaina's tone softened again. Hey, Duque, what did you say last time about the effective way to prevent large-scale bombing? Dig a hole. Dig a deep hole. Hide the most important things in the ground. I understand. Theramore was by the sea, so digging a hole was definitely a difficult task. However, Jaina's other title was the Ice Queen. After Duque became a demigod as the only Breaking Dawn in the Alliance, and Kultiras was good at building ships and waterproofing, Jaina had ways to solve the problem of underground water seepage. Once it succeeded, even if it was destroyed by nuclear weapons, Theramore would still be like a nail nailed to the throat of the Horde territory by the hidden forces in the bunker. But now it seemed that it was not too late to change the plan. The Alliance and the Horde were still in the honeymoon period, and it would continue for a long time before the Draenor migration was completed. Jaina had plenty of time to adjust. Hey Duque. Since Theramore can't be used as a commercial port, and the original Kultira's territory is too small, should I give my people another place to develop? Duque smiled bitterly. This pillow talk was amazing. With a wave of his hand, another map appeared in the air. Duque pointed at it and asked, "What do you think of this place?" Jaina's eyes widened. At first she was delighted, but then she hesitated. "It's good, but Duque had a sneer on his face. "These guys have never done anything good. You don't learn your lesson after being beaten. Instead you hold a grudge. Since they are destined not to join the Alliance, there is no need for them to exist." "The Alliance will attack directly?" Jaina was shocked. "Of course not, we are a fair alliance." Looking at Duque's mischievous look, Jaina's face lit up with joy. "Batty, no wonder I like you so much. Even though you broke off the engagement, she still threw herself at you." In September of the same year, something that was neither too big nor too small happened in the Alliance. In Stormwind's Stranglethorn Vale expeditionary force was cleaning up the remnants of the trolls in Zhou Xian who believed in the evil god Hacker. A troop of trolls led by a priest broke through the encirclement of the kingdom's army and rushed into the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale. The Alliance attempted to chase after them, but they received a warning from the goblins in Stranglethorn Vale's hidden treasure bay, who claimed that the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale was their territory. Who knew that the Zhou Xian trolls, who hated all non-hacker believers, would sweep through the entire southern part of Stranglethorn Vale in a short month. The Gurubashi Arena, Thin Fog Valley, and even Hidden Treasure Bay were all taken over by the red-eyed trolls. The defensive line that the goblins had painstakingly built was pierced through again and again like paper. The mercenaries recruited from all over the world were like ducks being chased around, caught and killed by the trolls one by one. In the end, the goblins could no longer hold on. Just like when the Alliance sent out a request for help, another wave of trolls still trapped in Zhou Xian began to rebel. Stormwind couldn't even take care of itself, and even the Stranglethorn Vale expeditionary force was almost caught in a pincer attack. Fortunately, the Alliance urgently transferred an air fleet and brought over the Marcus family's infantry regiment led by Windsor. Only then was the situation stabilized. In October of the 22nd year of the Dark Portal, the situation in the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale was already rotten beyond belief. Nearly 100,000 trolls had almost wiped out the goblins there. The Hot Sand Conglomerate, which controlled Hidden Treasure Bay, organized 2 large-scale landings in an attempt to recapture Stranglethorn Vale's territory, but both failed. As a last resort, the big boss of the Hot Sand Conglomerate, Goblin Baron Livigaz, once again asked for help from Stormwind and the Alliance. The regent of Stormwind, Bolvar, refused Livigaz's request on the grounds that the king was at war in the Outer Realm and that there were not enough troops, and told him to report to the Alliance. In the middle of the same month, Duque rejected the request of the Hot Sand Conglomerate, which had previously claimed to be neutral, on the grounds that the Alliance was sending more troops to the Outer Realm. At this point, the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale, together with the surrounding islands, was officially under the rule of the Zhou Xian Troll Empire. In the tribe, it was not that there was no one who saw the possible tricks, but no one could do anything about it. The war between the Alliance and the tribe in the Outer Realm was at its fiercest, and it was impossible for anyone to have the energy to take care of the trolls in Zhou Xian. But everyone could foresee that the trolls there were like grasshoppers after autumn, and they would not be able to jump around for long. Once the war in the Outer Realm ended, when Stormwind or the Alliance recovered, it would be the death of the trolls in Zhou Xian. After that, the territory in the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale would probably have nothing to do with the goblins. In Orgrimmar, Varrock Salyafar, who stayed behind, asked Wujin in a deep voice. Let's do nothing, okay? What can we do? The Thunder Spear trolls are not the Zhou Xian trolls. The Rustwater conglomerate is not the Hot Sand conglomerate. What Wujin said was also true. From ancient times to the present, the trolls had not been a unified race. The same was true for the goblins. There were 5 trading princes among the goblins, and only the weakest prince of the Rustwater conglomerate, Gast Garavix, had joined the tribe. It was a different matter from the Hot Sand conglomerate. If the tribe rashly intervened, maybe the Hot Sand conglomerate would fight with the tribe first. Everyone could see that there was a huge hand behind this unusual event, and it was clearing all non-alliance forces out of the Eastern Kingdom. Perhaps in 3 or 5 years, the entire Eastern Kingdom would be a piece of iron. In fact, Wujin's guess was right. In Duque and Jaina's plan, when the Alliance and the Horde's Outer Realm Expeditionary Force returned to Azeroth, it would be the day when Kull, Gurub and Stormwind cleaned up the trolls in the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale. When the trolls who believed in the evil god Hacker were killed, Kull, Gurub would have a brand new main city in the southern part of Stranglethorn Vale. Chapter 1384. Duque had no qualms about swallowing the goblins' territory. In the game he felt that the goblins were notorious and disgusting. In Booty Bay and other places controlled by the Hot Sand conglomerate, if you accidentally touched the wrong mouse or used your magic staff to graze a goblin's skin, countless goblins would rush out from every corner to gang up on you. There was nowhere to run and they would beat you to death with a stick. Therefore, some players did not hesitate to rely on the Bloodsail pirates just to gang up on the goblins. In this life, illusion became reality. The goblins used the name of neutrality to do dirty things, which was even more exaggerated. Not to mention the most ruthless venture capital companies among the goblins, they were a classic example of evil. They dared to trample on all human laws with only a 300% profit. But the goblins could make something with a 3% profit turn into a 300% profit. Similarly, they also trampled on all laws. The milk seller mixed water into the milk, but these bastards mixed lime into the water. It was fine as long as it looked white. It did not matter if you died or not as long as you got the money. Later, after the Alliance did business with the goblins, they strengthened the inspection regardless of the method or frequency. Duque also specially added probability to prevent Alliance merchants and official procurement personnel from being fooled. The result was good. For example, in order to strengthen the physical fitness of the next generation of Stormwind citizens, Duque proposed the slogan, "A cup of milk a day makes Stormwind strong." Did you know how the goblins fooled Stormwind City? Stormwind City had a lot of inspection methods, right? The goblins mixed cow urine into the milk. Anyway, whether it was steamed or dried, it was still cow components, right? They would give you, "A cup of urine a day makes a weak Stormwind person." Anyway, every time something was exposed, the goblins would push the person directly to the forefront. It was up to the goblins to kill them. Later on, there would be a second or even an infinite number of fellows who wanted to do business with the Alliance, especially the Marcus family in Stormwind. Because everyone knew that the Marcus family was rich. In the early years, the goblins organized various theft gangs to blow up Duque's family's treasury. After many failures, the theft turned into fraud. In any case, every time it was exposed, the goblins would immediately disassociate themselves and claim that it was done by their subordinates. They were absolutely neutral. Only a goblin who successfully swindles money from the Marcus family is an outstanding goblin. This kind of crazy and twisted values had become more and more intense during the period when Alicia was in charge of the Marcus family's finances. The goblins were like moths flying into a flame. Wave after wave of swindlers appeared, attempting to swindle the goblins and become famous among the goblins. It was only after Duque returned from the War of the Ancients and cut off all trade with the gnomes that they started to restrain themselves. The Alliance's cold treatment of the various groups of goblins was also an important reason for forcing the Rustwater conglomerate to lean towards the Horde. The Rusty Water conglomerate joined the tribe 10 years earlier than the original history. Although the tribe had obtained a lot of goblin technology, the consequences of introducing these cancerous tumors was really ha. So this time, the Alliance borrowed the hands of the trolls to clear the goblin forces in the entire Stranglethorn Vale. From the venture capital company camp in the middle of Stranglethorn Vale to Hidden Treasure Bay, one of the pillars of the Hot Sand conglomerate, Duque really had no psychological burden. When the Outland expedition was over, Duque would gradually reduce the living space of the goblins step by step. Perhaps one day there would be no more goblins in the entire Azeroth, and the world would really be much more peaceful. Duque opened up the magic network while controlling the war in Stranglethorn Vale. At the same time he also remotely controlled Mark Dooku, who was in the Outland. Out of bad taste, the name he used 10,000 years ago was attached to this doppelganger. Due to perfect control, this Mark also showed impeccable human habits. He needed to breathe, eat, drink and defecate. Occasionally he would make mistakes when casting magic due to the scattered elements in the Outland. No one doubted that this high-end wizard who had fought side by side with them for so long was actually a puppet-like imitation. William and Thrall had a good time working together. From the middle of Hellfire Peninsula to the Dark Portal in the east, there was a path of glory. This was the path that the old Horde had taken when they gathered here and prepared to cross through space to attack Azeroth. Of course, looking at this path now, it was a little ironic. This was because the target that the old Horde had tried to conquer was now fighting back with the new Horde. Although it was to liberate the beastmen who were threatened by the Burning Legion, it still felt strange. In order to make each other feel at ease, on that day after taking care of the demon army that had obstructed the Alliance army from entering the Outland, the Alliance and the Horde used the Path of Glory that traversed through Hellfire Peninsula as the dividing line. The south was controlled by the Alliance. With Fort Glory and the Vanguard camp at the Dark Portal as the core, a series of sentries and bunkers were built to form a line of defense and ensure the supply line. The north was handed over to the Horde. With the support of the Alliance's resources, the Horde only took 2 months to build a medium-sized fortress, Salma. From October onwards, the Alliance and the Horde split up and attacked Hellfire Fortress together. There were differences in the distribution of specific tasks. The Horde mainly dealt with the fell beastmen. They used as many non-lethal methods as possible, such as throwing nets and the tear-inducing aura provided by the Alliance, to capture their demonic brethren and imprison them and send them to the rear. The reason why these fell beastmen were so violent was because of the blood of the Lord of the Abyss. Magtheridon couldn't compare to his boss, Manaroth, but if the dosage was large, it would still be quite troublesome. Almost every day, close to 1,000 fell beastmen would be sent through the Dark Portal to the Warhammer camp in the northwest of the Blasted Lands. There they would be treated by the Horde shaman's natural magic. After a certain amount of poison and demonic power was expelled from their bodies, they would be given Stratholme holy water and other methods to quickly get rid of the demonic blood in their bodies. Under the leadership of William, the Alliance broke through the walls of Hellfire Fortress and turned to attack Magtheridon's lair. On the 16th of October, Thomas suddenly received a notification from the mission announcer of Fort Glory, asking his team to head to Fort Glory to meet Daneth Trollbane. Thomas was overjoyed. Although the people of Stormguard had always wanted to meet this legendary next king, Daneth always did things according to the rules. They could meet for official matters of the Alliance, but they couldn't meet for private matters. Now that they finally had the chance to show their faces in front of the future king, Thomas and the others were rather excited. With Thomas and Duque in the lead, a few core members of the Highland Warrior Group arrived at Fort Glory under the guidance of the guards. It had been a long time since Duque saw the 5 heroes of the Expeditionary Army, who were supposed to have statues erected in Stormwind City. He suddenly felt that his eternal youth was too much of a cheat. The handsome Daneth Trollbane from the second battle at the Dark Portal had now become a bald, white-haired old man. Chapter 1385. During the first years of the Dark Portal, even though Donnaz had the great surname of Trollbane, Salas did not show any favoritism. Salas, on the other hand, didn't show any favoritism. He made Donnaz start as a member of the militia. If not for the soul-stirring battle of the Dark Portal, perhaps Donnaz would have been like the collateral descendants of the large families, vanishing into the masses. After surviving the Second World War of the Dark Portal, guarding the Watchtower in the Cursed Lands, coming to the Outland and becoming the manager of the Glory Stronghold, Donnaz used his conscientious character to prove his reliability to the world. In terms of strength, Donnaz definitely could not compare to those fierce men of the same era. Whether it was in the original history or in this life, he did not have any outstanding records of fighting a strong enemy. Not everyone could become the hero that was the center of attention. Many times, a general who could guard a region was far rarer than a fierce general who could charge into battle and seize the flag. Donna's was obviously this kind of general. Steady and reliable. Seeing him like this, Duque sighed. The once young commander who did not know the taste of worry. Now, under the ravages of time, if someone told Duque that Donna's was 60 years old, Duque would probably believe it. Donna's had a typical Mediterranean hairstyle with snow-white sideburns, a typical full beard and a face full of wrinkles. All 10 of his fingernails were black. If he wasn't dressed in military attire and had a pair of sharp, sword-like eyebrows, he would look like a typical old farmer. He had just turned 40 years old this year. Duque wondered if he should give him a quota of eternal life. Ever since Duque sold his mount Xianxia to the Void battlefield, Alexstrasza had already obtained 50 quotas from Nozdormu for him. She also promised that as long as he asked, she would definitely give him enough. But even though Duque had received great benefits from these mortals, he would not casually give them away. Anything once overflowing would lose its value. Until now, Duque had only given Windsor and Big Van Cleef. After he returned from the Outland, he would give him another as a gift. Donna's glanced at Thomas, then at Duque. He was stunned for a moment, but he quickly turned his gaze back to Thomas. Duque, who was in Karazhan, laughed out loud. Donna's had such a reaction because before Duque had returned to participate in the Battle of the Ancients, he had put on a lot of makeup, almost to the point of plastic surgery. Apart from the black hair and black eyes, he looked like a completely different person. Many things could be changed, but a person's temperament was the hardest to erase. They were both wizards, and Donna's easily thought of Duque from more than a decade ago. Back then, Duque was also at the weak Morning Star realm and had a pair of deep eyes that were filled with wisdom. Of course, today's focus was on Thomas. Donna stood with his hands behind his back and focused on Thomas. Ever since we entered the Outland, the Highland Warriors group's results have been pretty good. 132 missions with a completion rate of 95%. The mission release team gave you a rating of Legend. Because even if you failed the missions, you faced powerful demons that required an entire army or a hero to deal with. To tell you the truth, I am very satisfied. Thank you for your compliment, Trollbane. Marshal. Thomas actually wanted to call Donna's Your Majesty, but he was stuck. In the end, he still called him by his military rank. The position of Marshal was given to Donna's by order of Duque after communications with the Outland had been restored. Before the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, because of the chaos caused by Tyreenas and the other countries, military ranks were generally too high and there were more marshals. After being promoted, they could not be demoted, so most of the time marshals did what generals did in the Second World War. Basically, the generals who could take charge of an area were all marshals. Donna's was an upright soldier and was used to the excitement of his comrades. Thomas had not said anything wrong, and he had no intention of pursuing the matter. Alright, gentlemen, the Alliance would like to entrust you with a mission that is not mandatory. Because the danger level is quite high, there are no mandatory requirements for the results. This is an elite mission and the difficulty is high, so the points and rewards will be doubled. How many points and rewards you get will depend on your results. Thomas was excited and immediately stood at attention. We will do our best to complete the mission. Don't agree too early. The Alliance needs a small to medium-sized team that's strong and smart enough to open up the connection between Glory Castle and Shotrath City that was once severed. Also, they need to collect the topographic map along the way. This isn't an easy task. Donna smiled, his weather-beaten face had deep wrinkles. He was no longer young, but he envied the drive of those young people. Thomas had just turned 28 and was at the best age for a man. He was strong and had a lot of battle experience. As an old soldier who had experienced many wars, Donna's boasted that he could see through 99% of people, but he found that he could not see through this Mark Dooku. In his 20 years in the army, Donna's had seen all kinds of mages. Most of them were from the Dalajan and Stormwind City's Royal Magic Academy. Those little fellows were like flowers in a greenhouse, and needed a long time to adapt before they could become qualified battle mages. But Mark was different. In his eyes, there was no fear of the unknown, nor was he the kind of young man who had just entered the battlefield, fearless because of ignorance. His wise eyes seemed to be able to see through all the fog in the world. This was a calmness and magnanimity that did not match his age. According to the information, This mage Kultiras should have been unorthodox and not suitable for such an important mission. Donas noticed that this Mark Dooku's identity was actually from Kultira's court. Donas thought to himself, maybe he's a disciple of some court mage who came out to train. Suddenly, Donas's confidence in this mission increased. You also know that the Alliance commander, His Excellency Duke Marcus, has become a demigod of the weave, right? Thomas and Duque nodded at the same time. Donas nodded to a white-bearded old mage beside him. The old mage said, more than 20 years ago the Alliance still relied on people riding griffins. Most of the time they could only send messages on horseback. But today the Alliance can no longer do without magic. The Outland is a place where magical elements are quite unstable. Since the Second Battle of the Dark Portal, the Alliance has been using magic to send messages. Seems very bad here. Sometimes we can guarantee continuous communication for a few hours. And sometimes we can't contact the outpost 3 miles away for a few weeks. Chapter 1386. The first thing you need to do is to go southwest from Glory Castle and enter the Thorn Path. Set up a magic communication relay device every 5,000 yards. With them we can guarantee communication in 99% of cases. Make sure they are in a safe place and not destroyed by monsters. Also mark them well. Your basic mission is completed. After saying that, the old mage bowed to show that he was done. Donas spoke again. Next is the follow-up mission for the advancement. For every additional part completed, there will be double or even triple the points and rewards. The details are written in the report. First, if possible, try to reach Shotrath City. The Alliance urgently needs information on Shotrath City. Finally, if possible, try to escort at least one emissary from Shotrath City back. The mission was clear and the direction was clear. There was nothing much to say. Since entering the Outland, Thomas and the other Highland Knights had mostly taken on missions to clear the monsters around Glory Castle. They were very familiar with the terrain and the way to fight monsters. And this time there was a big bug mount that was completely different from the Alliance. Although it affected the appearance of the city, it had to be said that the Karaji bug mount was really useful. It had a high IQ and could basically understand the master's thoughts under the control crystal. Not afraid of death, able to fight, even if the bug was thrown to cover the rear, it wouldn't complain. It could climb mountains and wade rivers and it wasn't picky with food. It could eat dead monsters, rotten meat, rotten wood, and even its dead companions could become food. Basically, other than being ugly, it was all good points. Everyone was quite disgusted with the Alliance letting go of those bugmen who had killed so many of their compatriots. As the war went on, everyone accepted these strong bugs. The Horde had the battle wolves, the Alliance had the bugs. It sounded a notch lower, but it felt more useful than the battle wolves. Moral integrity was not as valuable as life. No taste, no moral integrity or life was more important. As long as one was in the middle or lower ranks, they would choose it. And the bug mount could be replenished endlessly. Delicate things like battle horses were not so easy to replenish. The mission was decided. At this moment, in the bedroom on the top floor of Karazhan, Jaina reclined on the chaise longue, elegantly sipping a mouthful of black tea. Then she put down the exquisite white porcelain cup and quietly watched the internet addict demigod play games. Of course, she didn't know that Dumuk's dream before he transmigrated was to have his own game room with a big screen and top-notch equipment. Even playing Minesweeper with a 4-way Titan graphics card was a decadent and depraved game. On the contrary, Jaina felt that Duque, who was working hard, was very charming. Due to the damage to his Azeroth astral soul, he had no choice but to stay behind. He had no way to conduct the frontline command that he loved the most, and he had no way to personally participate in the great adventure against the evil enemies. Yet he was still able to find joy in this kind of situation, using his imagination to find a new solution. Sure enough, only a man like this was qualified to possess her in such a domineering manner. He even made her accept the fact that she was just a part of his harem without any complaints or regrets. Hey Duque, are you really not going to consider directly intervening in the affairs of the Outlands? Jaina asked as she rested her chin on her hand. Duque shook his head. Now that I think about it, even if I didn't want to stay here, I shouldn't have gone to the Outer Realms. Now Kil'jaeden and I can be considered to be trading pieces. Duel? Indeed, if Duque did not go to the Outer Realms, he would be able to avoid the traps set by the Burning Legion in the Outer Realms. Duque did not move and Elune was also there, so they would be restraining Kil'jaeden. However, Duque used a remote control method to solve the problem of him not being able to directly participate in the battle. If it was any other powerhouse, they would most likely not be able to affect the overall situation because they had switched to a clone. Duque was a weirdo. As a transmigrator, he had used his intelligence to kill countless strong enemies. He believed that this time would not be an exception. Anyway, even if he really lost, it would only be a clone and he could make it in half a day. Although I don't have unlimited revivals this time, I will play the Clone War with you. Let's see if you're afraid. The next day, Thomas and the rest were ready. The Highland warriors had 38 people, a total of 120 insect mounts. Could be said that one person rode 3 mounts. They majestically set off from the south gate of Honor Castle, taking a detour to the Thorny Path. After leaving Honor Castle, Duque looked at the sky and secretly sighed. "What's wrong?" Thomas asked. "Nothing, it's just that I can't get used to this kind of world." "Indeed. No matter how many times I see it, I won't get used to it. This sky that was close to eternal night. There was no sun, no clouds, there was only blurred and illusory darkness. From time to time, an unknown bolt of lightning would flash through the sky, piercing through the boulders that were spinning in the sky. The gravity was obviously normal, but there were boulders floating in the sky. There was no sunlight, but the closer they got to the scarlet dry ground, the brighter it became. This kind of unscientific scenery felt strange no matter how one looked at it. From the reddish-brown hill where Honor Castle was located, if one followed the slope down, they would be surrounded by enemies. Anything that did not have an alliance insignia would attack you. Gulp. A sound that the recruits could not understand sounded from afar. Thomas and the rest immediately frowned. Immediately, a violent cloud of dust rose from afar. Hellboar, a dark elf scout, had long since shouted from the left wing. Hellboar, a typical wild beast that had mutated due to the overflow of demonic blood. It had the extremely strengthened body of a demonic creature, as well as the instinctive ferocity of a wild beast. This thing roamed the entire Hellfire Peninsula. Almost every week, the Alliance would specially organize a hunt for it. Unfortunately, it could only reduce its numbers, but it was unable to completely eradicate this terrifying species. The Hellboar itself was not very strong in close combat. What was scary was its charge. Under a full charge, the Hellboar's tusks had once destroyed a new model tank. This wasn't an old-fashioned steam tank, but the Alliance's latest diesel tank. In the Outer Lands, because of the unstable air pressure, the steam engine's starting condition was quite bad. The Alliance had no choice but to send the latest diesel tank to test it. Although diesel also had all sorts of problems, at least it could be used and it had more horsepower. The dwarves had installed an even more insane 130mm steel plate on the side of the tank. Even so, it had been directly pierced through, instantly destroying the engine and ammunition compartment, as well as losing 3 elite dwarf tank soldiers. Seeing this berserk Hellboar charge over, Thomas frowned on the spot. If hit by that big thing, at least 2 or 3 bug mounts would be destroyed. Although the bugs were not bad in close combat, their relatively thin legs had always been their weakness. Bug mounts had no way of dealing with the charge. "I'll do it," Duque said softly. Lightly, a hole as thick as an arm appeared under the Hellboar's front hooves. The Hellboar's charge became the biggest killer. The instant its left front leg sank into the ground, its charge and weight directly tore off its entire leg. Chapter 1387. The Dry Land, the Howling Wind. The atmosphere was scorching hot, devoid of any signs of life. What did not match the atmosphere was the team's atmosphere. "Wow!" "Huh!" The team members all screamed and jumped in joy. If it was any other team, the most common method would be to send a strong professional, preferably a defensive warrior, to take the Hellboar's charge head-on, then drag it into a battle of attrition, slowly whittling down this thick-skinned demon boar. There was no other way. Creatures that had been demonized were generally very strong. But now there was a newbie rider, a big shot personally controlled by Duque Mark Dooku. That was to turn something rotten into something magical. Unless it was an undead creature, No one would be able to endure tearing off a leg while sprinting at high speed. The hell boar, which only had 3 legs left, screamed in pain. It struggled madly, venting the rage in its heart, trying to use its hooves and horns to kill any creature that approached it. If this was a mission issued by Honor Castle, they would probably have to fight a fierce battle to take care of this thing, but they had a more important mission. Mantis shrimp, let's go. Duque patted the red bug mount he was riding. The insect let out a low hum, then moved its 4 sharp and long legs and ran away. Ah, awesome. Thomas and the others laughed and followed. The Hellfire Peninsula was a hellish place, a world where the strong preyed on the weak. If they left this 3-legged boar that weighed more than 2 tons here, it would not live for long. Moreover, this place was not far from Honor Castle. The guards on the guard tower had already seen this scene. Just because Duque and the others did not accept the mission didn't mean that others did not. As a matter of fact, there were already other teams eagerly rushing out to take advantage of the situation. Thomas and Duque did not care. The group of people swaggered off. The bug mount was very fast, over 40 kilometers per hour. But because of the strange curvature of the bug's legs and multi-joint shock absorption, it was not as bumpy as a horse. Not long after, the towering Honor Castle behind them disappeared into the horizon. A day later, the outermost guard tower in the southwest of Honor Castle was also left behind. The team had completely left Glory Castle's territory. Yeah. Thomas used a very standard charging movement while holding a lance that was over 5 meters long in his hands. The sharp spearhead accurately pierced through the head of a steel-toothed marauder while moving at high speed, and the rather tough head of the marauder directly exploded like a rotten watermelon. Purple blood splattered in all directions. At the same time, the center of the spear that was supposed to slow down the momentum of the knight and the lance exploded. Let's go. Thomas did not stop and called for everyone to continue the assault. This insect also had a 4-legged pedestal-like base. Its lower body was very similar to the Karaji insect people, but its Magata-like upper body was abnormally ugly. However, its mouth full of buck teeth was not just for decoration. Duque had personally seen an Alliance knight get his upper body bitten off less than 20 meters in front of him. Please note that the entire upper body was bitten off together with the 5 mm thick plate armor. From another aspect, this reflected that Thomas's shot was quite exquisite. For a giant insect with high speed and agility, he could still change the direction of the spearhead while charging at high speed along with the head of the steel-toothed marauder. This skill was like stabbing a matchbox with the spearhead at 60 kilometers per hour. It was amazing. Should it be said that he was worthy of the title of Highland Knight? Along the way there were no hordes of monsters, but there were still all kinds of losses. 3 Kiraji insect mounts had their legs broken. Because they had just set out, their supplies were still quite full. They could only move the most important supplies, abandon the excess goods, and let the 2 insects fend for themselves. 2 cavalrymen from Lordaeron were ambushed by a void demon. Half of their bodies were swallowed and there was no need to pull them out. Only half of them were left on the spot. Duque used a round of arcane missiles to finish off the void demon, which could be considered revenge. After spending 3 days, the team arrived at the thorny path. Looking at the scene, almost everyone frowned. Isn't this too dangerous? Thorns were thorns, yes, but the roots were huge thorny plants that needed 2 people to wrap their arms around. It was a nightmare. The only path was an arched passageway in the thorns that could accommodate 2 carriages side by side. This was the so-called path. In theory, this could lead to the Taraka forest, but no one knew what was in this path or if the path would become smaller and smaller after entering. In the end, they were tragically stuck inside, unable to advance or retreat. Thomas used his spare knight's spear to poke at the thorns, and found that the spear was not sharp enough. If a person were to collide with it, gulp, everyone could not help but swallow their saliva. Finley, can you do anything? Thomas called out to a night elf. As a member of the Cenarian Expeditionary Force, Findley Swiftspear was specially transferred here for this mission. This elite druid looked at it, carefully sensed it, and shook his head. No. The land here is full of corrosion and decay. My power is not enough to affect the land here. Not to mention these thorns that have been here for at least 1,000 years. Thomas looked at Duque again, and Duque also shook his head. These hardened thorns were quite resistant to fire even if they were dead. If Duque's main body was here, he would have flattened it. Finally, he looked at the sky and soon Thomas gave up. There were still many flying beasts wandering in the sky. They circled back and forth, gauging each other's strength. From time to time, a raptor would suddenly attack another and then feathers, blood and even organs would fall from the sky. The prize for the winner was the corpse of the loser. The Alliance tried to send a team of griffins over, but only one griffin knight returned alive and he died not long after. Let's go in. I'll go first. Shaking his head, Thomas took the lead and rode the worm into the thorny path. The dense thorns quickly blocked out all external light. Even with a torch in hand, they still had the vague feeling that they would die the next moment and be impaled on the thorns. This was a path that no one had used for at least 10 years. If not for the fact that most of the thorns had died due to the decay of the land, such a path would have long been covered by plants. Even so, the team was still extremely careful. The only fortunate thing was that Duque gave way to a dozen fireballs. The team formed a long snake formation around them, allowing the light to be slightly better. At this moment, Thomas, who was at the front, suddenly heard a scream coming from a place further ahead. Someone was attacked. Chapter 1388. There were people in front of the thorny path? Thomas's first reaction was that it was impossible. Before he left, he had already confirmed that his team was the only one sent by Honor Castle. Now, the main force of the Alliance was besieging Hellfire Citadel under the leadership of King Varian, and no matter how far the Alliance scouts went, they could not pass through Zanger Marsh, which was further west of Hellfire Peninsula. Now the entrance to the swamp was filled with a thick poisonous fog. Before the Cenarian Expeditionary Army's druids purified the fog, no one could pass through. Could it be Drenii? Duque finished Thomas's words. Perhaps this was the only explanation. The situation in the Outland was quite chaotic, and the major forces were intertwined with each other. Kale, that must have sat on his private phoenix and brought his underlings along the way, flying to the northernmost stronghold of the storm to help the Drenii guard their home. In the southern Taroka forest, he threw a team of his own there, and they directly became Shotrath City's astrologer. That was it. Although the Drenii would not be completely wiped out, what could they do with such a scattered force? In the center of the Outland were the two pits of Hellfire Citadel and Zanger Marsh, which blocked the way. What made the Alliance angry the most was that Thrall did not control his subordinates, or rather, those guys had been harboring evil intentions for a long time. Kargath Bladefist, this guy who died in the dark portal of Azeroth in this life and was resurrected by Sun King as a forgotten warrior hero, actually rebelled and announced that he would accept the power of the Burning Legion as an undead. He also regained control of the Shattered Palm clan and ran to the Shattered Hall of Hellfire Citadel to become the boss. Thrall was exasperated and turned to attack the Shattered Hall. Other than Kargath, there was also the chieftain of the Blood Ring clan Kilrog Deadeye, and the chieftain of the Bone-Gnawing clan Harkin Cranium Splitter. In this life they were killed in the Dark Portal and were also resurrected by Sun King. Like Kargath, they had also served Nazul under Kil Jaden's control. After being resurrected, they did nothing until they returned to the Outland. Only then did they reveal their ferocious fangs and raise the flag of rebellion. Unlike Kargath, Kilrog and Harkin were nowhere to be found. Duque suddenly had a feeling that the situation in front was related to these two chieftains who had run off. Charge! Thomas jumped down from the Zerg and raised his excellent shield up high. He drew his one-handed sword and rushed to the front. Then, with the illumination spell that Duque cast on his shield, he managed to distinguish the things in front of him and moved as fast as he could. Don't come over. Don't come any closer. A sobbing voice came from ahead. It was a female Drenii. Thomas and the others didn't understand, but Duque heard everything clearly with the help of the translation software. That's right. It's a Drenii. Duque's words made Thomas advance even faster. Thomas carefully placed the upper part of the large kite shield on his visor, revealing only half of his helmet. Using the gap in his helmet, he tried his best to look into the distance. He was close. He was close. It was getting closer and closer. Thomas brought Duque, Findlay and a few other experts and rushed over first. After running for about 3 minutes, they saw their target. How should I put it? The current situation was rather comical. There were two huge and twisted vines, and in the narrow gap between the two vines, a blue-skinned dreamy-eye girl squeezed herself in. She seemed to have used a hammer to smash the small thorns in the middle of the vines so that she wouldn't get hurt and could hide from the pursuit of the two steel-toothed raiders. However, even though the two frenzied raiders couldn't squeeze into the narrow gap between the vines, they still used everything they had to attack the dreamy-eye girl. Their sharp claws kept going in and out, scratching the inside. The gap wasn't very deep. Even if the girl squeezed in with all her might, she still couldn't avoid the sharp claws that reached the end. Her butt happened to be facing outwards. Because of their body shape, the dreamy eyes but was more perky. As a result, the girl's butt suffered and was scratched by the sharp claws again and again. The fresh blood stimulated these mutated monsters, and they seemed to become even more violent. Duque was the first to make a move, using the old trick of Calm and Mind plus Flame Blast. No matter when it was used, it was always high-end and classy. The sudden burst of light frightened the two steel-toothed darters. The one in front tried to dodge to the right, but in its haste, it was pierced by a large thorn spike. In the next moment, it turned into a barbecued meat skewer. Of course, no one would want to eat the barbecue meat of the steel-toothed raiders. Originally, the other raider wanted to run, but Findlay directly smashed Starfire on the raider's head, which instead aroused the ferocity of the beast. It let out a sharp cry and rushed over recklessly, just in time to meet Thomas's charge. Bang! With a loud noise, Thomas directly slammed its whole body into a thorn, and a dozen sharp thorns pierced its body from behind. Even so, it was still fine. It twisted its body frantically, trying to use its claws to kill Thomas and drag him down with it. How could Thomas, who was already prepared, give it this chance? Almost at the moment when charge hit the target, he immediately activated Counterattack Windstorm. The raiders' fierce attacks, which were as dense as raindrops, were all withstood by the thick fine shield. With the support of the warrior profession's unique fury, Thomas made an attack that exceeded the limits of his normal body. The long sharp sword seemed to turn into a dagger, quickly and ruthlessly stabbing into the raider's abdomen. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes, a total of 20 slashes, almost turning the raider's entire abdomen into minced meat. The two beasts died and the atmosphere immediately eased. Looking at the humans standing outside, the dreamy-eye girl was still in a state of shock. "It's okay. Please don't be afraid. We are Alliance soldiers invited by your leader Willen to Shotrath City." Duque opened his mouth and spoke in the extremely pure dreamy-eye language. This made Thomas and the others quite envious. There was clearly more than one hero who saved the damsel in distress, so why was Mark Dooku the only one to claim credit? Helplessly, other than him, no one else knew dreamy-eye language. "You are humans?" Unexpectedly, the dreamy-eye girl actually knew human common language with a thick accent. It was a little awkward, but they could still understand it. Everyone, including Duque, immediately realized they had picked up a treasure. "Yes. We are humans. That's right, who taught you the common language? Those blood elves? Astrologer?" "Yes, Lord Willen instructed me that in order to better communicate with the human-led alliance, it would be best for me to learn the common language. These days I have been studying very hard and it seems like it has come in handy." As the dreamy-eye girl spoke, she bared her teeth and crawled out from the gaps of the vines. Chapter 1389. On the surface she was covered in blood and was in bad shape. Duque could tell at a glance that the girl was very lucky. They were all superficial wounds that could be healed with a healing spell. Unexpectedly, just as Duque was about to call for a priest, the girl actually started healing herself with holy light. Oh, and a priest? Taking advantage of this moment, Duque sized up the dreamy-eye girl. The girl had a figure similar to that of a human female, slim and slender. If it wasn't for the faint lines of her biceps on her arms, one would probably think she was a young lady just by looking at her silhouette. Her light blue skin glowed with holy light, and the girl was bathed in a holy aura. Although in Duque's eyes this level of holy light was still very shallow. She had two S-shaped curved goat horns on her head, and below her knees were recurved hooves that were a little unthinkable for humans. For balance, the girl's body also seemed to have become curvy in both the front and the back. There was no gorgeous clothing. The dreamy-eye girl was dressed like a typical commoner girl. The white linen top only covered her well-developed outland peaks. It seemed to be a typical off-the-shoulder outfit for ease of movement. The top that went from below her ribs to her neck made her neck look even more slender. A pair of leather pants that should have been brown had now turned dark red due to the blood staining them. She carried what in theory was a short warhammer in her hand, but in Duque's eyes, it was just a wooden stick and a metal lump. Duque noticed that there was no blood on the head of the warhammer. There wasn't even any blood left behind. A rookie on the battlefield for the first time? Duque really didn't know why Wei-Luan would send such a rookie to die. In the chaotic outland, it was enough for her to die 100 times. But no matter how he looked at it, this guy's luck was EX+. If she had the ability to come to the thorny path alone, she actually ran into the once-in-a-century Alliance advance team. "Excuse me, can you please turn around?" I. The dreamy-eyed girl's face was red. While Thomas was still in a daze, Duque had already come to a realization. She felt that her buttocks had been pierced by the flying man's sharp leg. Now that she was going to heal herself, it was really indecent to be injured there. Duque thought for a moment. Seeing that this guy wouldn't have a high-end item like a storage space bag, he directly handed over a piece of canvas. "Thank you." The girl's face turned even redder, like a freshly steamed prawn, and she quickly took the canvas. A few minutes later, Thomas met up with the rest of the army, and the dreamy-eyed girl's wound was also healed. Seeing the large canvas patch on the girl's butt, Thomas, the silly goose, suddenly came to a realization. The girl was quite clever with her hands because Duque also saw a hole above her butt. The edge of the hole was even smoothed out, so that the dreamy-eye's nearly half-a-meter-long blue tail could be seen. What a nimble tail. It wagged and wagged, bending left and right. Duque couldn't help but think of when he was taming dragons. Sometimes he would get Onyxia in human form to give him a red tail that was proportional to a human's body for him to rub. Every time he saw the strange dizziness on the black dragon princess face and heard her moans, Duque would feel very satisfied. This was like stroking a cat, addictive. Suddenly, the dreamy-eyed girl screamed, attracting everyone's attention. Only then did Duque realize that his hand was cheap. He actually reached out to grab her tail and rub it. "I was too curious. Is this the first time you've seen a dreamy-eye?" Yes." Duque lowered his head. "My companion didn't mean to offend you. We're actually all very curious," Thomas hurriedly explained. "No. It's okay, it's not your fault. But please don't touch a dreamy-eye's tail so casually in the future. They usually get angry, especially males." The girl lowered her head. Then the girl took a deep breath and raised her head. There was a look of self-encouragement on her face. Even though there was still fear in her eyes, she tried her best to encourage herself and clenched her small fists. "Please forgive me for being flustered. I've never killed anyone before, large creatures. My name is Imriel and I'm Karabayer's apprentice. Are you the vanguard sent by the Alliance? Looks like the holy light is really on my side today. Then I'm willing to go with you. Let's go to a safe place first." Hearing this signature introduction, Duque in Karazhan, who knew how many light years away, felt as if he was struck by lightning. There was only one voice in his mind. What the heck? It's actually hooves. How is this possible? As for having the same name, that was impossible. Among the dreamy-eye, their mother of holy light would never give them the same name. In Duque's mind, there were 100,000 rhinoceroses galloping. It was as if every rhinoceros was grunting in a strange voice. F*** your lungs. F*** your kidneys. If all the major events that Duque had experienced before basically overlapped with the historical events in his mind, then it would match up. Then now this matter was definitely a mess. According to the original history, this dreamy-eyed girl Imriel, who was affectionately called Hooves by countless players, would only appear in the 6th version of World of Warcraft, King of Draenor. Normally that would be at least 30 years after the Dark Portal. Why would she appear at this time? No. The dreamy-eye's lifespan was already extremely long. Didn't you see that the 3 leaders of Eredar from 25,000 years ago were still alive and kicking? Didn't you see that even after 10,000 years, the Eredar twins were still as beautiful as flowers? If Imriel lived for 8 to 10 years, it would be equivalent to 2 to 3 days for humans. Regarding this deviation in history, Duque was convinced. "I'm Thomas Faddock, a warrior, the captain of the advance party that the Alliance sent to Shotrath City. I'm Mark Dooku, a mage, the vice-captain of the advance party. After a round of self-introductions, everyone finally knew. At this time Shotrath City was being attacked again. The one leading the army was actually Kilrog Deadeye, who had just defected from the Horde and ran over to Illidan's camp. Shotrath City had never really been restored, even with the addition of some blood elves, who were the current astrologers. Shotrath City was still in a precarious situation. Willan, that quack, claimed to have seen the future. He had a premonition that there would be an Alliance team heading towards Shotrath City from here to seek contact. So, even though he was in a state of shortage of troops, he still sent a team of 20 people to provide support. However, not every Draenei who received the protection of the Holy Light would be immortal. It was not easy for them to get out of the secret path. Before the group of 20 could even walk out of the Terakar forest, they were attacked by their former comrades who were now the Broken to the north of Turum, the former Draenei settlement. Chapter 1390. The Broken were once a race of Draenei who were influenced by the power of the Burning Legion. Many of them had lost their rationality and ego due to various circumstances, or changed their appearance and temperament. The current batch of breakers were the brainless ones. After sacrificing half of their companions, they were lucky enough to escape and entered the Thorn Trail. They were then surrounded by dozens of Steelfang marauders, and in the end only Hoof Imriel was left. The original captain and vice-captain were all killed on the way. Duque scratched his head and thought, is this the lucky E of the ancient walk-on? But this was war. Although high-end martial arts could be used as the deciding factor, most of the time, it still depended on the efforts of mortals to tilt the scales of victory in their favor. Duque felt a little sorry for the Draenei. After transmigrating for so long, Duque had seen many worlds. But now, Duque finally had a taste of what it felt like to continue to hold on to a world that was about to fall into the abyss of hell. He could not help but recall the rich elven forest. Even though it was once burned by the flames of war spread by the beastmen, with the washing of time and the efforts of mortals, it was still able to recover. And not this land that was getting more barren by the day. Let's go. To Shotrath. Thomas said, but realized that Imriel did not move. It was obvious that this Draenei was acting out what it meant to be a rookie trembling. That was really trembling. The trembling was even more obvious on her tail. That was because every member of the Alliance team was riding on a large bug. These bugs looked very tame. But no matter how she looked at them, they were no different from the Steelfang marauders that almost took her life. Come on, it's okay. Thomas, who was riding on the bug, gently reached out his hand. Imriel looked left and right and said weakly, Mr. Dooku, can I ride on the same mount as you? At this moment Thomas's body suddenly stiffened, and the expression on his face froze. It was not hard to imagine that his single dog heart received 100,000 points of critical damage at this moment. The bystanders couldn't help but wonder if a gust of evil wind would blow in the next second and cause his entire body to be eroded and dissipate with the wind. Duque's face was full of embarrassment. In Karazhan, Jaina slammed the table and laughed. Duque, I didn't expect you to be able to provoke the little girl even though you're controlling an avatar. Is this the legendary fatal invisible flirting? What else could Duke do when the other party had already said so? Mark, who was controlled by Duque, smiled and said, It's my honor, madam. There's another advantage to sitting behind me. At least you don't have to be afraid of being pricked by the edges of the armor. If that was the case, then forget it. I've never ridden a mount before. Can I sit in the front? I'm afraid I'll fall off. Thomas received an additional 1 million points of critical damage to his soul. Sure. While riding on it, Imriel noticed a detail. She noticed that there was a line of words engraved on the hard shell of the worm's neck. Mount Akina. This is... Duque's face turned red, but he immediately put on a serious face. There's no time to explain. Get on. Oh no, get on quickly. Oh okay. The newbie was pure. She realized that she had been delayed here for too long. Now that her capital was under siege and her people were constantly being sacrificed, she was still dawdling here. She even needed Mark, an ally, to remind her. She really shouldn't have done that. At that moment, Imriel couldn't help but respect Duque. With someone leading the way, the rest of the matter was much simpler. They still needed to pass through those few areas. Under Imriel's lead, the Alliance's advance party could avoid many places where monsters gathered. While looking for a place to insert the magic net signal booster, they pushed forward. The advance party spent 5 days and finally passed through the thorny rocky grounds, bypassing Turum, and arrived at the southwest of Shotrath City. Shotrath City was the capital of the Dreenii people of Draenor. Another meaning of its name was where the Holy Light is. After Kil'jaeden deceived Nizul and provoked the orcs to start a war against the Dreenii, a fierce battle broke out here. Although the Dreenii held fast to the capital, Shotrath City still fell. The entire city was reduced to ruins until Shotar came here. Originally, this place had already begun to be rebuilt. Although the progress was incomparably slow, it was indeed being rebuilt. Unexpectedly, after Illidan returned to the Outland in order to make the entire Outland his strongest backing, he began to purge all those who opposed him. At that moment, the sound of war drums outside could be heard even a few kilometers away, reaching the center of Shotrath City. Unlike the tense atmosphere of the battle outside, the center of Shotrath City was quiet. Shotrath City had a strange structure. In the center there was an incomparably huge hemispherical hall. The buildings of the Dreenii all had a similar style. This hall was a bit like the Temple of Krabr, the Dreenii's holy land. It was supported by huge gray-brown pillars. In between the gaps of the stone building, it was all dazzling purple and blue glass. The pointed leaf-shaped doors were stacked one after another. No matter when it looked like a beautiful work of art. In the center of the hall, there was a human figure made of countless golden leaf-like fragments floating in the air. That was the synonym for holy light, Naru. This kind of energy creature with a strong sense of self was the most resolute existence against the Burning Legion. In front of the surging energy of the Naru's seat, even the most bloodthirsty warrior would be at peace, and the most exhausted believer would be in awe. In front of the seat of Naru, anyone who glanced at it from afar would receive great comfort from the pillar of holy light. In front of the seat of Naru, Valen carefully recalled the clues he had recently sensed about the future, trying to discern the deep or shallow connections between them. Over the past few months he had sensed more and more fragmented clues. The Dreenii prophet crossed his legs under his body and put his hands on his old knees. When he meditated, the crystal seemed to respond to his power. It shone, pulsed, and danced around him in a chaotic but not orderly way. Countless illusions that could happen in the future were surging towards him. Once again he sensed a variable full of hope coming from the east. At this moment, on the wide passage of Shotrath City, Garrison Officer Morlad was holding a huge crystal warhammer, fighting against those hateful beastmen. These guys looked no different from 20 years ago. He was very tired. Even if the holy light gave him endless courage, it still could not completely offset the exhaustion of his body. At this moment his hooves slipped, causing him to fall to his knees. Seeing an incomparably filthy broken axe about to chop his neck, he could even feel the aura of death emanating from the poorly made axe blade with a few notches. Suddenly the tribe blew the horn to retreat. What happened? Chapter 1391. The Dreenii were at an absolute disadvantage. Although they had the support of the Holy Light and could theoretically heal their wounds endlessly, the Holy Light was not omnipotent. The blood lost in the wound could not flow back into the body, and the lost strength could only be recovered through rest. Unless there was a high concentration of Holy Light, there was no way to defend against knives, axes, and clubs. In the face of an enemy 10 times their size, the advantage of the Holy Light had been worn out. If it were not for the magic support of the astrologer, Shotrath City would have been breached long ago. It could be foreseen that if the situation did not improve, it would be a repeat of 25 years ago, and the Dreenii would once again lose in a war of attrition. The orcs used blood and lives to wear down Shotrath City. However, the loud sound of war drums, the clanging of weapons, the moans of the dying struggling on the ground, and the angry roars, all the sounds were stopped by the sound of the retreat horn. What happened? Every warrior on the battlefield had a confused expression. Last time, the one who saved Shotrath City from destruction was the blood elf who had now become an astrologer. Who is it this time? No one. In the desolate sky there was nothing. Ordinary birds and beasts had long been scared away by the loud noise. In the distance, the fell orcs who had learned their lesson had sent back and forth patrolling wolf riders. There were no reinforcements in sight. What drove Illidan's lackeys to give up the victory that was within their grasp? There was only one answer. It was a blue flag that had been raised beside the Driniai's holy light war flag in Shotrath City. None of the Driniai had seen this war flag. Legend had it that the flag of the alliance from another world, which had reached a preliminary alliance with the Driniai, was also blue. But that flag had a lion on it, and this one was a tornado. Could it be that this flag scared the enemy away? That was impossible, right? The Driniai garrison officers almost forgot to breathe, and looked at this scene with an expression that they had never seen before. Not to mention them, even the Driniai maiden Irel who had just raised the flag was so shocked that her jaw almost dropped. Her teeth were chattering. It actually scared off those ferocious orcs. Thomas, who was standing at the side, was also extremely shocked. Of course, he recognized this flag, or rather he had grown up listening to the legend of this flag. This Storm Duke flag was the symbol of an era, a living legend. One flag to repel an army of 10,000. No one had expected that the miracle that had happened in Kuel Salas's Silver Moon City, which had been sung about by countless bards in the taverns, would repeat itself. Duque was already a demigod. Of course, he wouldn't bother to boast about himself. Even if he did not do so, Thomas and the other spectators would naturally tell Imriel about the legend of the flag. In an instant the little girl had turned into a fangirl. Even her gaze towards the Storm War flag had become filled with some kind of fanaticism. It wasn't her fault. In recent decades the Driniai had been bullied by the orcs. As outsiders of Draenor, how could the orcs give them face? Long before the orcs, under the instigation of Nizul, started a full-scale war against the Driniai, both sides already had a feud. All kinds of border conflicts and mutual harm had long been the foreshadowing of this great war. It was just that at that time the orcs lived a scattered lifestyle with clans as units. The Driniai also tried their best to suppress themselves under Valen's persuasion. But so what? The orcs took pride in killing the Driniai. The brave Driniai, their fathers and brothers, had their heads chopped off and made into specimens, which were hung on the war flags of various clans. Their wives and daughters were used as food to feed the bloodthirsty war wolves. And all of this came to an end with the unparalleled war that lasted for several years, as well as the fall of Shotrath City. Battle after battle, defeat after defeat. Defeat after defeat. This was the portrayal of the Driniai. Today the evil orcs came again. With hope for the light, the Driniai once again tried to defend their holy city, but no one had really imagined the taste of success. They relied purely on courage to support themselves. That kind of desperate struggle and the feat of easily scaring away the orcs formed a stark contrast. The Driniai maiden Irel had a strange emotion in her heart that she could not understand. She suddenly became extremely eager to see the owner of this flag. At this moment in Karazhan, Aurelia, who happened to be strolling by Duque's place, saw this scene. Yo, not bad. I didn't think that this big flag of Duke Marcus could be used to swindle people in the Outland. The eldest sister of the Windrunner family teased Duque. Duque laughed. If it was all those brainless fell orcs, there really wouldn't be any way. Just nice, the one leading the army is Kilrog Deadeye. If it was another orc leader who was not clear-headed, he would most likely only be frightened for a moment, and would never give the order to retreat. Kilrog was different. He had inherited the memories of his previous life, and also the fear of being an orc. That was from the beginning of the second battle at the Dark Portal. No matter how he struggled, he could not succeed. No matter how he tried to change himself, he was still tortured by Duque. He could not take down the Iron Furnace Fort and was brutally abused in the final battle. Then he turned around and followed the new boss, Nizul, and was abused again. He even died next to the Dark Portal. More importantly, Kilrog was one of the rare beastmen who possessed Esper abilities. His single red eye had the ability to see the future to a certain extent, even though it could only see small fragments of the future. But all along he had relied on this ability to consolidate his power and kill in all directions. This time, without exception, he looked at the flag with his one eye, which was usually blind. As expected, he clearly felt a trace of Duque's divine power. Almost at the moment he looked over, Kilrog saw an illusory projection of Duque that was even larger than Shotrath City. In Duque's deep black eyes, there seemed to be a dazzling seven-colored flame burning in the depths of his eyes. Duque opened his mouth slightly, and the next moment, the voice of the soul that came out seemed to shake the entire Draenor world. Sargera's soul trembles under my feet. Archimonde's soul was nailed to death by me on Mount Hyjal. Kilrog, who do you think you are? I'll only say this once, scram. The buzzing in the soul world triggered countless strange and blurry scenes of light. Kilrog saw at this moment that Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, died tragically under Duque's sword. He saw the insufferably arrogant Archimonde being blown to death on Mount Hyjal, and even his bones were still hanging on a withered tree. He saw the huge and boundless distorted Void Fortress being wantonly blown into pieces. It turned out that the new master that he thought was invincible actually had such a weak side. Chapter 1392. At this time Kilrog was already drenched in cold sweat. You can't possibly come to our world. You can't possibly come here. This is not your domain. It was as if he was asking himself, but also as if he was emphasizing it. It was more like an unconscious form of self-hypnosis. In his dazed state, Kilrog muttered these words over and over in a neurotic manner. What did I do wrong? No. I didn't do anything wrong. Sir was too weak. Orcs will never be slaves. Bah. What he's doing now is to turn the Horde into eternal slaves of the Alliance. This world is the territory of the orcs. It's the world of the Burning Legion. You're just a demigod from the outside world, you can't do anything. Kilrog was a smart person full of ambition. He would obey the strong, but that was under the premise that the other party had shown his decisive strength. He firmly believed that Illidan under Kil'jaeden could better fight against the detestable Alliance. So, after returning to a place he was familiar with, he brazenly chose to raise the flag of rebellion. The funny thing was that when he faced Duque again, the first thing he thought of was the terrifying days when he was dominated by Duke Marcus. Continue to charge? No way. That guy is crazy. He can even burn his own main city, so he wouldn't care about the main city of the Draenei. The main building of Shotrath City was originally nested in the basin, and it relied on a few huge suspended tunnels for people from the outer city to directly enter the main building. If they used kerosene around the basin and set it on fire, then all the orcs in the tunnels would be finished. Chaotic memories floated into Kilrog's mind. The more he didn't want to think about it, the clearer his dusty memories became. The orcs had absolute military strength? That wasn't the first time. One fire burned the elven forest, and nearly 100,000 orcs were burned to the ground. So what if they attacked Stormwind City? Another fire burned another 100,000 of your elites. They had an overwhelming military strength, but every time hundreds of thousands of orcs would be buried at the bottom of the sea, all to be fed to the fish. Every chief knew that changes had to be made, so they tacitly agreed to Orgrim taking power. But so what? He was weakened time and time again and faced defeat time and time again. Finally, he reached the end of the road. When Kilrog woke up from the mental shock, he took a deep breath and exhaled all the air in his cold lungs in one go. His vocal cords, which were nourished by shadow power, let out a tremor of fear that came from the deepest part of his soul. All troops heed my command. Retreat. Although the evil beastmen were bloodthirsty and ferocious, they weren't like the legendary berserkers who completely lost their reason and couldn't distinguish between friend and foe. The signal to retreat rang out. No matter how unwilling they were, they still had to retreat. The Draenei guards and soldiers could finally breathe a sigh of relief. They lined up the guards, and then the main force slowly retreated back into the city. A large number of civilians began to pour out. Most of them served as logistics. They carried away every compatriot who was still breathing and used holy light to treat them as much as possible. They also cleaned up every evil beastman who was still breathing. This was not something that Duque and Thomas could handle. On the other side, Imriel, who was still in a state of shock, suddenly quivered. Duque noticed the faint holy light that shone beside her ear. There's such a thing? As expected, Imriel bowed to Duque and the others. Lord Valen is aware of your arrival and is now ready to receive you. Please follow me. All right. Duque and the others were near the outer city. Originally, the fastest way to get there was through the main passage that connected the inner and outer city. Because of the war, the 50-meter-wide passageway was already filled with all kinds of war machines or temporary bunkers. To enter the inner city, it was faster to walk through the basin. Walking through the messy basin, the surroundings had become a huge military camp, or rather a temporary shelter. There were injured Drenii soldiers and skinny civilians everywhere. It was obvious that the city had begun to implement rationing, and all resources were prioritized for the guards and soldiers who could fight. Imriel was obviously a celebrity here. Almost every Drenii knew her and greeted her. Of course, not everyone and everything was good. "Hey, Imriel. When are you going to pay me back the 6 copper coins you owe me?" A Drenii lady said in Drenii language. Duque could clearly see that Imriel, who had been walking briskly after defeating the orcs, was instantly petrified. Duque was speechless. Was this the so-called dark history? Or a hero stumped by a single coin? Who would have thought that the famous Imriel in history would have such an embarrassing moment? When Hoof heard this, her hair stood up on the spot. Her blue tail stood up like a cat's fur. She glanced at Duque guiltily. Seeing that Duque did not seem to be paying attention to her, she patted her chest and hurriedly replied, "Hey me. I've brought these guests to Lord Valen's place. That means I've completed my mission. I'll pay you back as soon as I get the reward." Just as she sent the sisters away, the naughty Duque who was controlling Mark Dooku said, "Miss Imriel, what's 6 copper coins? Do you need me to back you up?" On the other side, the Missy shouted again, "Imriel." Hoof immediately switched to playing dumb. "What? I can't hear you. What did you say?" On the other side, she grabbed Duque's hand and said, "Lord Valen is still waiting for you. Quick, hero. Before she catches up to us, let's go." Pfft. If it were not for the fact that it was not the right time, Duque would have rolled on the ground a few times, slapped the table and laughed out loud. Was this still the serious Drenii archbishop from his previous life? After entering the heavily guarded passage, Duque and the rest arrived at the huge hemispherical main hall. The curved walls were engraved with mysterious runes that glowed with light. A Naru who was glowing with a holy light and formed from a number of diamond-shaped blocks, was floating in the middle of the hall. Another older Drenii stood in front of the Naru. In every corner of the hall, the beautiful armor of the Drenii guards was polished until it shone brightly. Under the Naru's holy light, it looked even more holy. That older Drenii should be Valen. Standing around him were a few holy knights and guards, who bowed subtly to show their obedience to him. This obedience stems from a top-down power pyramid that is completely devoid of self-interest. Perhaps only a race like the Drenii who were completely idealistic would have such a thing. Duque respected the religious beliefs of others, even if he himself was at the top of the hierarchy. The problem was he who had received the education of the great celestial empire was a complete materialist. Chapter 1393. In the world of Azeroth, Duque had seen many gods. There were false gods, true gods, and evil gods. The biggest feeling that these gods gave Duke wasn't that they didn't have their own ideals, but that they were more humanized. Hacker was brainless and xenophobic. Thun was immoral and devoured everything. Elun was willing to take care of all good creatures under the stars. None of these gods were as pure as the Naru, and none of the believers were as completely selfless as the Drenii. Now that Duque had stepped into the realm of the gods, he should be prepared to have some fanatics who worshipped him. After all, he might be like Elun in the future, needing priests to spread his faith. Perhaps the power of faith mentioned in many novels before he transmigrated would be a necessity. Although Duque understood the purpose of these people's existence, he was afraid of dealing with fanatics. "Yes, I'm just Mark Dooku, a little mage in charge of delivering letters and guarding the front lines." As soon as he thought of this, Duque immediately activated secret observation mode. At this time, a few huge figures stood in front of the team. The leader was a burly Drenii in heavy armor, the shield of Valen, the personal guard of the prophet. "For safety's sake, I can only let 2 of you see the prophet." Thomas was keenly aware that he, the so-called messenger, was not the target of the other party's attention. It was obvious that the scene of Duque planting the flag had stunned the Drenii. In fact, it was not just Thomas who felt this way. Even Imriel noticed that many eyes were focused on Duque. Imriel flashed a silly smile. I will wait outside. After the Prophet Valen summons you, if you still need me, I will be at your service. Thank you, Imriel. Thomas and Duque both revealed friendly smiles. Under the guidance of the shield of Valen, Thomas and Duque slowly walked over. As they walked, Thomas used small movements to tidy up his armor that he had already tidied up a few times. Duque heard Thomas muttering softly, I am now representing the Alliance. The two walked closer. Willan wasn't originally a part of Shotrath City. Valen used to live in the Shrine of Karabaer. Duque could still remember the first time he saw the Shrine of Karabaer in the game before he transmigrated. Above the shimmering sky, bright stars surrounded the bright moon, shrouding the vast land in eternal twilight. The Shrine of Karabaer was located between the vast sea and the dark plains of the Moon Shadow Valley. Unfortunately, the Karabaer temple had already fallen during the war between the Drenii and the Orcs. In the original history, Nizol, who was still the great chieftain, had once opened a crack to another world in the temple of Karabaer, which resulted in the explosion of Draenor. In this life, Nizol directly knelt in Karazhan. According to the information that Kale, that's had previously sent back, after the Orcs lost Nizol, the temple was occupied by the Lord of the Abyss, Mactheridon. Then when Illidan was beaten up by Arthes in Northrend, he returned to the Outland and colluded with Mactheridon. The Temple of Karabaer became Illidan's lair. By the way, when it was occupied by the Orcs, the Temple of Karabaer was renamed the Temple of Darkness. Valen, who was homeless, could only temporarily hide in Shotrath City. Duque began to look at Valen, the super swindler. To be honest, no matter how many times he saw the Drenii, especially the male Drenii, Duque could easily associate them with demons. After all, they were of the same origin. The Drenii only called themselves Drenii after they split from Eredar. It was hard to imagine that the same race could give birth to the Drenii, a race of extreme light, and also evolve into the incomparably evil race of Eredar. Valen was very old. Even as a Drenii with an almost eternal lifespan, he still looked very old. Compared to the light blue skin of the Hoof Imriel, Valen's skin was more of a deep bluish purple. Because of his extremely long white eyebrows, coupled with the long beard that reached his navel, and the long blue beard on his chin that looked like 4 cow tails for a moment, Duque thought that he was looking at a lobster man or something. The antennae, the beard and the like were too powerful. Valen's white robe had complicated red embroidery with golden edges. Coupled with the noble and elegant purple as embellishments, and the huge back that looked like 4 torches that were taller than his head, he looked even more like a swindler. Towards these fancy things Duque did not feel anything. However, when Duque and Valen looked at each other, he was suddenly shocked. At first, Valen's gaze was extremely calm, even to the point that his gaze felt like sunlight. For countless years, months and days, it warmly shone upon every living being. His deep gaze was filled with wisdom, and it gave off a trance that could easily see through all falsehoods. However, in the next moment, the eternal calmness on Valen's face was swept away, replaced by a fleeting shock and anger. Compared to the calmness a moment ago, it was even more frightening. Even though Valen had only said one word, it was enough to raise the vigilance of Valen's shield and the guards. In less than a tenth of a breath's time, they had already unsheathed the weapons at their waist. Numerous Valen's shield had already raised their large shields, blocking in front of Valen. Everything happened too quickly and Thomas was caught unprepared. No one expected that in the next moment, Valen and Mark, who was controlled by Duque, would raise their right hands at the same time to stop them. It's fine. The one who spoke was Valen. Have we been seen through? The one who smiled bitterly was Duque. Valen immediately made a gesture and all the guards scattered. He turned his head and bowed slightly to Duque. Please forgive these children. In the long years that have passed, Killed Jaden has never given up on killing the Drenii. The one he hates more is me. That is why there has never been a lack of assassinations around me. I understand. Duque replied calmly. I have my difficulties as well. Can you keep what you saw a secret for me? Of course. After receiving Valen's reply, Duque turned around and faced the dumbfounded Thomas. My apologies, Brother Thomas. Actually, I am the envoy for this visit to Shotrath City. I have no choice. I have received a secret order from the highest level of the Alliance. This is a secret order from the commander of the Alliance, Lord Duke Marcus. Please check it. Duque handed a very formal document to Thomas. The document was, of course, real. It was just something that Duque had casually made up last night while controlling Mark to take a dump. Thomas, you have already completed your duties very well. Go and rest first. Let me discuss this with Lord Valen. After sending off Thomas, who had a strange expression on his face, Duque faced Valen alone. Alright, let's get straight to the point. Chapter 1394. Duque was not at all surprised that Willan could see through him. Willan was originally an Eridar. This mysterious race not only had high intelligence, but they also had talents that other races could only look up to in terms of the soul and the use of various energies. Duque could trick passers-by and trick hooves, but he definitely could not trick Willan. Willan had probably already seen through the fact that this Mark Dooku in front of him did not have a soul. Thinking of the elemental line that connected from outside Shotrath City to the forehead of this person in front of him, it would be strange if Willan did not know that this Mark Dooku was a puppet. Duque guessed that Willan had also used some special backtracking methods to find out that he was a demigod or something. It was very magical. Even after Willan had done so much, Duque still did not feel touched in Karazhan's defense system or his own spiritual senses. This method was also amazing. As expected, he could not underestimate the heroes of the world. At this time Willan spoke. The 4 lobster-like tentacles on his chin made Duque's balls ache. Was this 4 blue balls glued to his chin? I did not see through everything, but I deduced that it was you. Alright, honorable guest, how should I address you? Just call me Mark Dooku. But the agreement I reached with you will be sent over in the form of an official document from Fort Glory within 3 days. Duque was still very careful. He did not doubt the loyalty of Willan's subordinates, but the Burning Legion's methods of gathering intelligence had nothing to do with loyalty. Any detail could be analyzed and a lot of things could be calculated. Mark Dooku was not a suitable chess piece to be exposed at this time. If there was no direct video and first-hand information, then Duque, who could not leave Azeroth, could only command blindly if he really wanted to. When Willan heard Duque's words, there was an obvious sense of relief on his face. The situation of the Draenei was too bad. It should be said that they had not been well for the past 30 years. Recently, with Illidan becoming the king of the Outland, the situation of the Draenei had worsened. It wasn't that Willan hadn't come into contact with the Alliance from the alien planet called Azeroth. In his eyes, the Draenei were the natural allies of the Draenei, who had fought against the Old Horde and fought against the Burning Legion. He was also confident that he could convince any of the higher-ups of the Alliance. The problem was if he couldn't even meet them, he would be in despair. Kale, that's took good care of the Draenei, but Kale, that sent a division to Shotrath City and ran to the Draenei's spaceship. The Draenei's retreat was important, but Shotrath City was also crucial. The most troublesome thing was that Valen learned from the astrologer who had defected to them that the seemingly powerful Prince Kale, didn't have much say in the powerful alliance. The alliance was a union formed by a bunch of countries of different races. The foundation of the alliance was the kingdoms, so each king or leader would have a certain degree of say. The race with the largest number of kingdoms was the humans, who were the core race of the alliance. And above all the kings was the commander, who was jointly elected by the kings of the various countries. That was the human mage Duke Marcus from Stormwind. Valen was very happy that the alliance was made up of the Church of Holy Light, who also believed in the Holy Light. But there was another problem. Only a king called Kalia Menethil believed in the Holy Light, and Kalia was almost a mascot in Kale, that's words. Most of the power of the alliance was in the hands of the mages and warrior leaders. What else could Valen do? It was very difficult for him too. Due to the inconvenience of transportation and communication difficulties, he barely knew that the Alliance and the so-called New Horde had begun an expedition to Draenor through the astrologer's intermittent magic transmission. He also heard that it was the king of Stormwind City who had come. Valen was both happy and nervous. For the arrival of the Alliance, Valen could be said to have painstakingly prepared a lot of materials. Originally, Valen was already very happy to be able to get on William's good side. Who knew that after using his soul to backtrack, he would find out that the master of the puppet in front of him was actually the only demigod in the alliance. Valen was so excited that his hands were almost trembling. Although due to the situation I was unable to reach a face-to-face exchange, I am still very grateful to the Alliance's commander, His Excellency Duke Marcus, for taking this seriously. I am the one who is embarrassed that I can't come personally. Then before we officially talk, I hope to show you something, His Excellency, the older Drenii said softly. He stretched his body and floated up. The prophet maintained a height of about 10 centimeters above the complicated and gorgeous patterns on the ground of Shotrath City. He approached Mark and tried to press his palm between Mark's eyebrows. I am very sorry for this action. To achieve telepathy this is necessary, the prophet said. Duque was curious. Is it about Argus? Or is it about the period when you were one of the 3 heads of Eredar? Valen was struck by lightning. He was struck by lightning. One had to know that at this point in time, the Drenii's contact with the Alliance was simply too one-sided. Many of the big shots in the Alliance had not even seen a living Drenii. They had only seen the fragments of the magic mirror from Kale. In addition, there were not many people from Eredar in the Burning Legion. Even Archimonde, his appearance had changed a lot under the dark energy change. Most of the Alliance had no way to connect the Burning Legion demons with a pair of bat wings with the Drenii. And the ones they were fighting on the front lines were still their old enemies, the Fell Orcs. Who would have thought that Duke would reveal Valen's background right from the start? That was not all. There was more to come. Don't be surprised. I once went back 10,000 years ago through the Bronze Dragon King Nozdormu, who controls time in Azeroth. There was a small mistake that time and I mixed into the Burning Legion. I faced Kil'jaeden's main body. I also know the grudge between Kil'jaeden and you and your people. So, in the matter of fighting against the Burning Legion, our interests are absolutely the same. If there are no major problems, I will represent the Alliance to invite the Drenii to join. Wait. Happiness came too suddenly and Valen simply did not know what to do. For the past 25,000 years, the Drenii had been hunted down and defeated again and again. It was fine if they were not a match for the Burning Legion. When they came to Draenor they continued to be beaten by the Orcs. After the Orcs were finished, Illidan continued to beat them. In the eyes of many of the Alliance's higher-ups, the Drenii were scum. Small population, weak combat power. In Kale's report, it only mentioned that helping the Drenii could gain an advantage in the war in Draenor. After all, the enemy of the enemy was an ally. He never mentioned inviting the Drenii to join. Well, Duque came up and said, "Bro, don't even think about it. The Alliance and you are destined to be brothers." It was as if Valen had prepared for today's exam for several years, memorized countless books and imagined countless possibilities. In the end, Duque just said, "No time to explain, get in the car." Chapter 1395. Valen was still in a daze. He could not believe his ears. Didn't the Drenii need the Alliance? Of course they needed it. The intermittent encirclement of the beastmen and demons had already pushed the Drenii to the brink of collapse. Now the remaining Drenii were not even 1% of the original number. It seemed like the price of recovering Shotrath City was the loss of almost all the young adults. Look, once they walked out of this hemispherical hall, they could see dying tribesmen everywhere in the residential area. They moaned weakly in the dirty and smelly muddy water, quietly waiting for the arrival of the Grim Reaper. Holy light was not omnipotent. Holy light could heal wounds and soothe the soul, but holy light could not solve malnutrition, could not let people regrow lost limbs, and could not kill the parasites that had burrowed into the body. Although Valen did not doubt that if those evil and dirty beastmen invaded the residential area, his dying brethren would teach the invaders what willpower was and what a desperate counterattack was, this could not stop this from being the best manifestation of the cruel reality of dying struggle. 25,000 years of fleeing did not shatter Willen's incomparably tenacious heart. If he were to fall, there would be no one else who knew the Burning Legion's background like he did. He could not fall even if his tribesmen were all dead, even if he was the only one left. At this time he learned about the Alliance and that there was a world in this world that the Burning Legion could not even touch. Even the astrologer of Shotrath City showed him a short video of the Burning Legion's invasion, including Archimonde's corpse hanging on the World Tree's severed limb on Mount Hyjal. Back then, in order to boost morale, the Alliance played this video on repeat in the main cities of the Alliance for 3 months. Of course, Valen recognized that this was his old friend, Archimonde, who was at loggerheads with him back then. From that day onwards, Valen was mentally prepared to hug his thigh. Again, happiness came too suddenly and he really didn't dare to believe it. After a short silence, there was a flash of joy. Valen bowed deeply. On behalf of 300,000 Drenii, I thank the Alliance for their generosity and acceptance. This is the honor of the Drenii. 300,000 was definitely a rough estimate. The Drenii had been killed off a long time ago, and were chased everywhere by the beastmen like ducks. Duque truly wondered if there were still 100,000 sane Drenii. Of course, Duque did not doubt that Willan had a special way to communicate with his people. For example, the twin emperors. F*C, that kind of precise number, which was accurate down to the single digit, had almost scared Duque out of his wits when he had first reported it. Of course, Duque would not deny this number. For a human population of tens of millions, even if all the Drenii went to Azeroth, they wouldn't even cause a ripple. That's easy. All countries in the Alliance are equal and the Drenii are no exception. Let the subordinates discuss the specific details. Now that the connection to the magic network is good, you can tell us if you have any requests. The Alliance will try our best to satisfy you. Food. Valen blurted out. As if he was afraid that Duque did not understand the severity of the problem, Valen emphasized, a large amount of food. The war destroyed all production. We've lost all our fields, so we can only send a small number of our compatriots through the secret tunnel every day to gather food in the forests outside the orcs' control. Food, right? How much do you want? The first batch, I hope to have 100 tons, and the sooner the better. As you wish. At this moment, Dumuk's level shot up from 0 to 100. He did not even need to blink. Dumuk. Magic lamp possession. He heard Duque snap his fingers, and the next moment, a few dimensional bags suddenly opened beside Duque. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of hard objects falling to the ground was continuous. Rectangular strips about 20 centimeters long, shining with golden light, fell out of the void. In just a few blinks of an eye, they had already piled up into a small mountain in front of Valen. Duque smiled. Please call Hoof. Imril here. Valen nodded almost imperceptibly. Naturally, there were servants who called in Hoof, who was wandering outside the hall, staring at Thomas while simultaneously activating secret observation mode. Hoof was curious. She looked calm on the surface, but her cheerful footsteps and large swishing of her tail betrayed her mood. What calmness! It was obvious that he had eagerly rushed over. Teacher Valen, you called for me? Imriel was a little excited but also a little nervous. Valen looked at his young disciple with a loving gaze. Ambassador Dooku is looking for you. Hoof turned her head and blinked her eyes. Is there anything I can help you with? Duque smiled without saying a word. He snapped his fingers again, and a 50 centimeters long, 25 centimeters wide and 20 centimeters tall thing that looked a little like an ice basin formed in front of the Drenii. At the same time, he also communicated with the water elemental plane and poured a basin of water into it. Although the taste will not be too good, it is indeed made from high-quality food. After saying that, Duque casually picked up a piece of gold and tore off the surface wrapping, revealing a solid brown piece. Duque casually threw it into the pool. At first it was nothing, but soon the small brick at the bottom of the pool began to react with the water and bubbles kept coming out. Plop plop. The strange sound attracted the attention of the surrounding Drenii. In less than 30 seconds, the small piece of brick greedily absorbed the water at a speed visible to the naked eye, and became a big soft cake that almost burst the ice basin. Duque made a gesture of invitation. A Valen shield stepped forward, broke off a small piece and put it in his mouth. Soon a smile appeared on his rough face. I tasted wheat, eggs and a few plant seasonings. It is quite nutritious. Almost as soon as he finished speaking, Imriel's tail spun like a windmill. Let me try it too? With light steps, Imriel also broke off a piece. It tastes good. Why did you say it did not taste good? At this moment in Karazhan, Duque slapped his forehead, his face full of bitter smiles. Aurelia, who was beside him, touched his nose and smiled faintly. Whether it tasted good or bad was relative. As a transmigrator, Duque's understanding of modern warfare definitely surpassed that of the world of Azeroth. He had long proposed the concept of compressed biscuits. Before Duque transmigrated, the humans and dwarves of the Azeroth all ate bread as their staple food. But during the two large-scale battles across the sea, bread was too troublesome and took up too much space. So, Duque insisted on adding things like compressed biscuits and canned fish to the logistics. To be honest, these were all warehouse goods from a few years ago, but the Draenei treated them like treasures. Chapter 1396. As a fan of the puppet army before his transmigration, and a commander who had personally led troops through many battles, Duque was well aware of how tough it was for the soldiers. Think about it. After a whole day of battle, the soldiers would be lying in the trenches or in the camp on the bloody battlefield. They would even have to soak their feet in the mud when the weather was bad. However, after a bloody battle, they would often be given a piece of black bread that was not much bigger than a palm. When this black thing did not get wet, it could be used as a brick to hit people. Although it was a staple food for the poor in this era, it was only the lowest form of protection for soldiers who desperately needed to recover their strength. It was better than nothing. Hence, after the Dark Portal defeated Arthas' Calamity army on the Lordaeron continent in 15 years, Duque took control of the alliance and proposed to make the first batch of compressed biscuits. Duque thought of a way to get the dwarves to mix the flour and then compress it into a small piece. Alright, it had to be said that the dwarves were very capable. He still remembered the first time he saw the finished product. Duque ran over to take a bite and almost broke his teeth on the spot. He finally managed to cut a small piece and smashed it with a hammer only to vomit on the spot. What the hell is this black thing? Magni shrugged. Probably engine oil? Lang looked down on Duque's lack of knowledge. Don't worry, a little engine oil won't kill anyone. When those bastards down there don't have any alcohol to drink, they still steal engine oil and mix it with water to drink. Duque rolled his eyes. These bastards thought that they had a long HP and high HP, so they were courting death. However, what the two dwarves said was the truth. During the second battle at the Dark Portal, when the Iron Stove Castle was facing a food crisis, there were still many fellows who shouted that they could go without food, but not without alcohol. Only later did they find out that the compressed biscuits were indeed compressed enough. The damn dwarves actually used a press to press the compressed biscuits and didn't even wipe off the oil stains. Duque spent a full 3 weeks to make this bunch of violent dwarves understand that the compressed biscuits could be given to the frontline soldiers. It must be able to bite through and there must be no impurities. It must also be waterproof and moisture-proof. Of course, this was a thing of the past. Now, the Alliance's standard military rations had been improved to the 5th version. Compressed biscuits, sealed packaged flour, canned soybeans, canned pickled dace, canned beef jerky. Most importantly, the Alliance had developed canned soup that could automatically heat up with a pull of a rope, as well as instant noodles that had poisoned countless youths before Duque's transmigration. With the addition of all kinds of new military stoves, they could eat freshly baked white bread when conditions permitted. If there were no other conditions, he could use clean water that had been filtered through a strainer to boil it. Hot soup and instant noodles would definitely not be a problem. In order to facilitate transportation, the Alliance had made many things standardized, such as boxes for storing artillery shells and canned military rations. Furthermore, the types of weapons were reduced, such as the size of the cannonballs and melee weapons. Only in terms of food there were more and more varieties. The beef jerky alone had 5 different flavors. No matter how conservative the commanders were, they had to admit that the morale of the soldiers was much higher than before. In the past, after a big battle, the soldiers were all like dead dogs, but now they were full of energy the next day. Back then, after the battle, we only had black bread. Instead of being hacked to death by the enemy on the battlefield, we almost choked to death on our own rations. The Alliance officers who were now lieutenants and colonels complained about this the most to the soldiers. Undeniably, because of these little things that the nobles and officers couldn't see, the Alliance's support for Duque had always been full. The Drenii temporarily wouldn't be able to experience this benefit. Of course, to prevent the Drenii from grumbling in their hearts when they found out the truth, Duque decided to give them a heads up first. To be honest, these foods were eliminated by the Alliance. Because of the high compression ratio, they are the most convenient to carry in spatial storage bags. Considering that you Drenii urgently need food, we used this method, Duque said apologetically. Valen used the holy light to examine it once, and a bright smile appeared on his face. No. Being able to fill our stomachs and survive is already the greatest gift to the Drenii. I thank Commander Duke Marcus on behalf of my people. For a moment, Duque thought he was hearing things. It sounded like the voice of someone with a high favorability rating. He took the time to glance at the system. Wasn't it close? He found that his reputation rating in Shotrath City had jumped from indifferent to irreverent. Needless to say, this time he almost moved himself. To use the food that the Alliance had accumulated for 6 to 7 years and was about to expire to give a favor, and then gain a huge boost in reputation, this was a good deal. Imriel, please distribute this food to your people. Duque turned and said to the hoof, who knew that when he turned around, Duque almost burst out laughing. Although the hoof was full of energy, it was actually starving, or it could be said that the food in Shotrath City was too bad, causing it to be gluttonous. What happened to the food test? What the hell, eating until both sides of your cheeks are full? What the hell is this? After noticing Duque's gaze, the hoof was so scared that it choked. It grabbed its neck with both hands, looking like a ghost that was about to hang itself. Woo, help. Duque was speechless. He also did not know how he understood. Anyway, he first passed a pot of water to Imriel and let her gulp it down, then helped her to pat her back a few times. Only then did she gulp down the food. Hoo, I almost thought I was going to choke to death. The hoof kept patting her chest. Duque noticed that she was choking on her tears. Valen, who was at the side, held his forehead. He was speechless, as if saying, "Why did I teach such a disciple?" "Excuse me." Valen could only smile bitterly. Duque thought of something. "Oh, it's okay. Imriel's behavior reminded me. A person who has been starving for too long, suddenly overeating will cause sudden death. So even if the food is distributed, please slowly increase it." Valen was slightly stunned, and the gratitude in his heart increased. A person who can think of such details is indeed a person whose heart is filled with holy light. Duque was speechless. All right, a few words can bring up the topic of holy light again. I, who was seriously discussing scientific knowledge with a fraud, feel so helpless. On the other side, Duque and Valen were discussing the next step of cooperation. On the other side, Imriel, surrounded by the guards, had already begun to distribute food. We have already joined the Alliance from the world of Azeroth. This alliance has defeated the Horde more than once. They even killed the first chief of the Horde, Black Hand. The Alliance has just sent people to deliver food. Everyone has it, no need to squeeze. On this day, countless Drenii were in tears. Chapter 1397. Who was the one crying tears of joy? Who was the one cheering for the seemingly ordinary food? There was only one answer: the Drenii. The Drenii were too bitter. They had been chased by their former compatriots for over 20,000 years, wandering everywhere with nowhere to hide. Almost every planet they went to, there would be burning legions, void battleships chasing after them. Forget about 1,000 years of peace, it was already good enough to have 50 years. Many times the civilizations and races they encountered were weaker than them. They could not help them resist the burning legion. In order not to screw them over, they would even take the initiative to leave those planets with intelligent beings. How could they be like today, receiving shelter and protection from a powerful force? From the astrologers who had already become a branch of Shotrath City, they had heard of the powerful legends of the Alliance. Now it seemed like they were lucky enough to be witnesses to this invincible legend. Be careful not to choke. If you've been hungry for too long, your stomach won't be able to take it if you suddenly eat too much. She had a serious expression on her face, as if the person who had just choked on the food was not her, but some passerby. Fortunately, the Drenii all believed in the holy light. Even the apprentices from Karabaer's temple had a sense of blind obedience. Both adults and children were hungry, but they were very disciplined. There was no crowding, no fighting, and everyone lined up to wait for Imriel and the others to distribute the food. Do you see that? There are many tons of food there, enough for us to eat for a month. Hold on for another week or two and the Alliance will open up a path from Hellfire Peninsula to Shotrath City. The Dreenii listened to Duke's little suggestion, and took the mountain of compressed biscuits and soft food that looked like puffed cakes and patrolled one round around Shotrath City. With food in their hands they did not panic. The Dreenii were famous for their resilience. Now they were even more confident that they could defend their main city. At the entrance of the main hall, the shield of Valen surrounded Valen and Duke, standing side by side. Valen looked at this scene and felt a lot of emotions. I really didn't expect this. There are many things that you didn't expect. The Dreenii joining the Alliance is a win-win for all of Azeroth and the Dreenii. The Alliance needs your technology and the guidance of the Holy Light. You need the Alliance's combat power and protection. We are natural allies, aren't we? Indeed. Valen nodded. Nothing could be more beautiful than this union. One had to know that within the Alliance, the Church of Holy Light was a pillar that transcended nations and races. Even though the Night Elves had the protection of Elun, the Holy Light Church was still the main force in the Alliance. Coincidentally, ever since Alonso's and Uther died, the position of Archbishop of Holy Light had been vacant. Duke immediately suggested that the great trickster Willan should take this position. They were of different races but their beliefs were the same. In addition, educating outsiders was a great honor for the Dreenii. How could Valen refuse? His heart that was hanging in the air had long since been put down. As long as the Alliance sent reinforcements, they would be able to announce that Delaney had perfectly merged into the Alliance. Praise the Holy Light. Praise the Alliance. Long live the Prophet. Now that he was full, if he didn't roar, how could he be worthy of this ecstasy and joy? The entire Shotrath city was boiling. The noise spread thousands of meters away, and the entire Fel Orc camp could hear the unique cheers of the Dreenii. Kilrog Deadeye knew that Shotrath city wouldn't be able to be conquered by just relying on him and his Fel Orc army. He was also suffering. When he first joined Illidan, the first order that Illidan gave him was a death order. But in the past few days he couldn't contact Illidan at all. His new master seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth. The command center of the entire Outland army was completely paralyzed, and the commanders of each place were fighting their own battles. Magtheridon asked for help from the Dark Temple, but the Dark Temple ignored him. He asked for help from Vasht's Naga army in Zangermarsh to the west, but Vasht said that without Illidan's orders she could only continue to carry out her original orders and extract the lake water from the swamp. As the saying goes, every family has its own problems. At this time the tribe was also in trouble. In the frontline camp outside Hellfire Citadel, Thrall looked up at the sky. The Azeroth sky and earth seemed to be a distant memory far away in his mind. All he could see was the endless darkness in the sky, torn apart by the occasional flash of light or mysterious energy. Seeing the stalwart figure beside him, Thrall asked, "What's the situation?" "There are a lot of casualties, but more importantly our food supply can't keep up." The dead man had no expression to speak of, but Orgrim's voice was full of shame. "It's all my fault. I should have known that the situation would be worse than I thought." He thought that when he returned to his hometown, the tribe with the orcs as the core would be fighting on home ground. He didn't expect that his hometown was still his hometown, but it had long changed beyond recognition. Even with the addition of the goblins, the tribe's supply method was still primitive. It was the kind of gathering local materials and then consuming the surrounding natural resources like locusts. 23 years ago, in the era when Orgrim left, it was still possible to hunt near the Dark Portal, despite the lack of resources. Now the land was completely barren, and even if there were monsters wandering around, most of them were demonized creatures that had been seriously contaminated by dark energy. There really weren't many prey that could be eaten. It wasn't that demonized creatures couldn't be eaten, but the problem was that eating them would make them more and more like Fel Orcs, and that was completely putting the cart before the horse. Originally, Thrall had also asked Kilrog and the other orcs who came from the Dark Portal later, but he didn't expect them to have ulterior motives. They actually lied and said that they were not much different from Orgrim's time. If the tribe could learn from the alliance and use elite tactics, they might be able to reduce the pressure by reducing the number of soldiers. The point was that they couldn't ask the alliance for help. I'm willing to bet that Duque calculated that we would have a problem with supplies, so he must have reserved our share. Orgrim gritted his teeth. This wasn't hatred, it was more like helplessness. None of the tribe leaders could blame Duque because before they passed through the dark portal, Duque had specially asked William to ask if they wanted to prepare supplies for the tribe. Of course, supplies were not free and the tribe needed to exchange more ore and resources. There's no other way. That's the only way. Thrall sighed. He had long noticed that the tribe was being invaded by the alliance's economy and culture. Ever since the ceasefire and forming an alliance with the alliance, he had been paying attention to boosting the tribe's race soul and reducing the invasion of the alliance's various values and social views. Now it seemed that he had failed. Half a day later, the canned beef from the alliance arrived from Fort Glory. There was a burst of enthusiastic cheers in the tribe's camp. This made Thrall feel even more defeated. Chapter 1398. Everyone was a natural foodie. The life of eating raw meat and drinking blood sounded heroic, but one would only know how bitter it was after living it. Without oil, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar, the prey they hunted would at most be roasted and eaten. How could this compare to the cumin-infused barbecue of the Alliance? Recently, when the tribe faced a disaster, it was the Alliance that provided them with food. In order to reduce wastage when crossing the ocean, canned food was of course the priority. In the tribal camp, Sal saw with his own eyes how a newly matured tribal warrior chose his favorite flavor and then skillfully opened the can. Look, Orgrim. Now even those kids know how to use canning knives to open alliance cans. Sal sighed. Orgrim was silent for a moment. Even though he was already a dead man, he still felt a heavy sense of duty on his shoulders. The Horde cannot defeat the alliance, not even with all the orcs in our world. If you fall behind, you will be beaten. Thrall squeezed the words out of his mouth. The alliance is not using force now, but they are gradually doing what Tarinas wanted to do in the past. Turn orcs into slaves. In other words, he wanted to assimilate the orcs, trolls and Tauren races into the alliance. This unstoppable trend was the most terrifying. The alliance was already ahead of the Horde in economic, military and political fields. In addition, there was a huge difference in population and country size between the two sides, as well as the fact that the leader of the alliance was a demigod who didn't age or die. Under normal circumstances, the tribe would have no chance at all. Unless the two tribal elders instantly thought of the same thing. But as soon as their eyes met, they looked away. That's right. Unless the alliance changed and suffered a crushing defeat, it had to be something like Duque dying in battle and the alliance collapsing. But neither of them would forget the principle of being in the same boat. If the alliance lost like this, they would definitely have lost to the Burning Legion. Perhaps this was a chance for the Horde to rise up, but it was more likely that the Horde would be destroyed along with the alliance. As long as the tribe leader wasn't an idiot, he wouldn't purposely make this happen. Zai. Do your best. It was November 2nd. On this day, good news finally came from the Allied army. William led half of the Alliance's hero team to kill the Lord of the Abyss, Mactherodon. 2 days later, the main force of the Horde conquered the entire Hellfire Citadel. At this point, the first goal of the Allied forces had been achieved. There were 2 general directions in front of the Allied forces. The first was to charge west into Zangermarsh. If they could open up the swamp, then the Allied army's choices would become more plentiful. They could turn north into Blade Peak and chase after those traitors who betrayed the tribe. Finally, they could go further north to the Nether Storm and settle all the unstable factors. They could also head south of the swamp and enter Nagrand, where most of the normal orcs lived. The second was to enter Terakar Forest from the southwest. He would completely establish a connection with the Dreenii, and then use Shotrath City as a base and supply transfer point. However, the following march would not be easy. This was because the Auchinton area in the southern part of the Tiroka Forest was completely out of control. There were a large number of undead creatures, Illidan's lackeys and the Crowmen. Of course, they could directly attack Moon Shadow Valley from the east of Shotrath City, where Illidan's lair, the Black Temple, was located. But if he did that, he would run the risk of his retreat being cut off. Because Vasht could easily ambush the allied army's supply line. No army could withstand this kind of attack from the front and back. However, the allied army could not avoid it at all. From Fort Glory to Shotrath City, Duque and his party could be said to have a smooth journey. That was under the premise that the Nagas did not make a move. Because on the road from the Thorn Cliffs to Shotrath City, not far to the north was Lake Hermia. That lake was connected to Zanger Marsh. Within 5 kilometers of the water, it was definitely the Nagas' world. In the Allied army meeting, the leaders of the Alliance and the Horde were all worried. Don't you have Nagas in the Alliance? How about letting them go into the swamp and fight with that Vasht? Orgrim would never forget how the elites of the Blackrock clan under his command were tortured to the point of crying for their parents 20 years ago. It was the same in South Shore, and it was the same in the hinterland's Seaview Cliff. Varian smiled bitterly and shook his head. I've already asked. I've also asked Duque to borrow that Naga. Did Duque refuse? Sal asked. No, the point is that Duque thinks that Vasht is likely to be a demigod. He doesn't have any good suggestions to give us. This time the faces of the leaders did not look good. They were good at fighting on land and barely passable in air battles. When it came to water battles, they could only be a group of salted fish shouting 666 at the side. Even with underwater breathing magic, it was useless. Did they have to go into the water wearing metal cans? There was no need to fight, they would sink directly to the bottom of the water. Once the duration of the magic ended, they could only type GG amidst the laughter of the Nagas. Can we only find a breakthrough from Taroka? Orgrim muttered. Varian let out a breath of turbid air. Fandral. In the name of the commander of the Alliance Expeditionary Army, I order you to lead the Cenarian Expeditionary Army and build a forward base just past the Thornfang region. You will think of a way to deal with Vasht's Naga troops. At the very least, you must restrain her. Fandral Staghelm said bitterly. Ever since Du made a small report before Isra left, Fandral's position in the Cenarian Assembly had become a little unstable. Tyrant had sent him to the Outland with a single order. Under the double pressure, he had no choice but to obey. Alright, it was not wrong to let the druids deal with the underwater creatures. After all, only the druids could transform into seals and have underwater combat power. Ignoring the constipated Fandral, the Alliance and the Horde began to discuss the defense of Taroka. The final result of the discussion was that the Alliance would defend Lake Hermia in the north of Taroka Forest, be responsible for transforming Shotrath City, and build a fortress at the entrance of the Moon Shadow Valley to prevent Illidan's counterattack. The Horde would focus on attacking the Auchinton area and opening up the road to Nagran so that more orcs could join the Alliance. This plan did not seem fair at all. The Alliance had to divide their forces, and the burden was also heavy. As the leader, one had to have the responsibility of leading. Now that the Alliance was stronger, this was the only way. In Karazhan, Duque finished reading the copy of the conference report sent by Varian, threw it aside and rubbed his eyebrows. I didn't expect Vasht to become such a huge problem. On the surface, once the road to Nagran was opened, it was possible to take 1,000,000 Horde troops and ignore Vasht and directly attack the Black Temple. But in reality, that was not the case. In the Outland, the teleportation portal was quite unstable. At most, Duque could open up a teleportation portal that was specifically connected to Shotrath City, but he could not guarantee a teleportation portal that continued to the front lines of the Moon Shadow Valley. Without a guarantee of supplies, he could not expect the frontline soldiers to have any combat power. I still have to deal with Vasht first. Chapter 1399. Duque never felt that Vasht was very strong. Even in the game before he transmigrated, the team led by Duque only took about 3 days to complete the first kill. In the reality of this life, Vasht became a big problem. If a Naga was more than 5 kilometers away from any large body of water, their strength would greatly decrease. Not only because they were aquatic creatures, but also because there was too little water in the air, which would directly affect the strength of the female Naga's magic. In water battles, Vasht, who was probably already a demigod, was almost unbeatable. As long as they stayed in deep enough water, in theory only the deep-sea giants could fight the Naga. The deep-sea giants did have a boss called Morogrim Tidewalker, But the problem was that he was also in the Serpent Shrine. He was Vasht's underling. Above Vasht, only Queen Azhara and the ancient god Enzoth were above her. Alright, they were all wearing the same pair of pants. The Naga's lower body was in the shape of a snake and did not wear pants. Sorry. If Duque could descend into the Serpent Shrine, Duque had at least a 90% chance of killing Vasht alone. Yet he dared to come and kill. Jaden dared to descend and block him. Duque did not have the guts to fight Co Egg, whose strength was 100% or even full of rage, in a place without anti-Titan and anti-Burning Legion formations. That would be courting death. Perhaps in the original history, because of this reason, there were not many big shots in the Alliance who appeared in the Outland War. Yet the geographical location of Zangermarsh was too important. One Vasht was like a sword of Damocles hanging on the neck of the Alliance army, ready to cut down at any time. Duque felt a headache coming on. Whatever, at most I'll just have to pretend and let Fandral take the blame. The entire month was spent in the Alliance army's rest and strategic shift. On the 5th of November at the easternmost side of Zangermarsh, Fandral personally went down to direct the arrangements and build the Cenarian camp. On the same day, Jaina was overseeing the blasted land, while Anastrian was at the Hellfire Peninsula. The two Breaking Dawns worked together to open the Dark Portal to the maximum, and finally transported the Alliance's most advanced road opener over. The so-called road opener was actually something similar to a road roller. But it was more violent and larger. Even if it had been dismantled and transported, it still brought a heavy burden to the portal. This was because the roller in front of the road roller was as tall as a 5-story building and as wide as 16 horse carriages. Think about it. A 5-story building was falling on you. What kind of earth-shattering feeling was that? The dwarves' current steel forging technology was not up to standard, and they could not make such a large roller. Black technology was never something that could be achieved in a single leap. If they couldn't form it in one piece, the dwarves could do it like building a ship. They could use rivets to fasten the bent steel plates together and weld them. As a result, a gigantic creature was born. Coupled with the Alliance's latest, slap-you-in-the-face diesel engine, this kind of road opener would definitely be shocking to drive. Wasn't that so? Anyone who had been inhaled by the black smoke from the chimney would feel like they had rolled dozens of times in a coal yard. Only a dwarf would dare to use such an environmentally unsound and inefficient thing. In any case, since the day this thing was born, Duque had forbidden it from entering any of the main cities of the Alliance other than the Steel Furnace Fort. What kind of joke was this? If they were sprayed by this thing, all humans and animals would die and there would be no need to plant crops. But there was nothing Duque could do. The diesel was still the latest product and the quality was terrible. The diesel engine was about the same, just one level higher than the steam engine. Alright, the Allied army could not go west. The entire Hellfire Peninsula was surrounded by air forces, and even if they flew over, they would be suspended in the void. With nothing to do, an army of 100,000 killed all the monsters southwest of Fort Honor in a week, and the steel-toothed marauders could only be found in the specimen room. After leaving Fort Honor, they went southwest, passed through the warp plains and arrived at the Thorn Path. The road opener only took 3 days. The intersecting, steel-hard, scalp-numbing thicket of thorns gave off a continuous series of explosions under the pressure of the road opener. Weren't you very hard? Weren't you not afraid of fire? Come. Who's afraid of who in a head-on fight? After the unreasonable road roller rolled over, the diesel bulldozer went up, and the dwarven construction team followed to pave the road and bridge. In any case, after 3 days of rumbling, they finally opened up a wide road that was comparable to the Glorious Avenue. In the Thorncliff, Duque, Thomas, Imriel, and a dozen Drenii stood on the side of the road. Seeing the huge road opener completely flattening the thorn forest, which was once the Drenii's forbidden land, Imriel and the others were stunned. Is this the strength of the Alliance? Imriel's tail kept spinning, and the curiosity of a young girl was evident on her face. Haha. The Drenii's technology level is actually very high. It's just that you lack energy. To be honest, Duque had his eyes on their black technology. If they could solve the problem of energy supply, the Drenii's interstellar warships and whatnot would be high-end. Compared to the Drenii, Azeroth's so-called latest diesel flying battleship was nothing. Although Duque would protect the Drenii, he must also get his hands on their technology. But now was not the time. Duque could not bring himself to ask them to sell their bodies, land and ancestral graves as soon as they entered the alliance. Moreover, before confirming that the alliance had the strength to fight against the Burning Legion villain, that old faker would not give them any solid information. At this time Duque and the others saw the mission officer of Glory Fort, and a damned dwarf with a particularly strong aura, the first person in the alliance's mechanized forces, Bulang Bronzebeard. He was not the king, but most of the time his authority was greater than the king's, because most of the alliance's new weapons were created by him. Seeing such an important person walking over, how could Thomas not be nervous? He is. Imriel asked softly, and at the same time half of her body hid behind Duque and pulled on Duque's robe. Oh, the dwarf Prince Bulang Bronzebeard, an important person. But it's okay, he's easy to get along with, Duque replied softly. Oh, you're the one with an outstanding battle record, the one who led a small team to make contact with Shotrath City, Mark Dooku? I heard that you were also the one who surveyed and evaluated the terrain. Bulang came over and handed over a flat metal bottle. Needless to say, that must be Bulang's collection of strong liquor. Dwarves did not beat around the bush. Giving you liquor meant that they thought highly of you and wanted to make friends with you. Friendship was deep and one gulp was enough. Duke didn't say anything and gulped it all down in one gulp. His face was not red and he was not out of breath. Mage boy, you have a good alcohol tolerance. Bulang gave a thumbs up. This is my special brew. It's 80 degrees and a normal human would pass out in 2 mouthfuls. The Dalajan mages are very slow, saying that it will affect the brain and they won't drink it no matter what. It's not interesting at all. Duque laughed. This was not his real body. All the food that entered the artificial stomach would be stirred and it would not affect the body at all. It turned out that by controlling the artificial humans, one could pretend to be the god of wine. Duque smiled slightly. I was born. That you're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.